All right, good evening to everyone. Welcome to the Monday, November 14th, 2022 meeting of the Falls Church City Council. Delighted you all can join us. We do have some folks joining us remotely, including our city manager and our assistant city manager. Oh, I'm sorry, I saw your picture there and you're right there. I'm sorry. Okay, there you are. Okay, well, but our city manager is joining us remotely and will be fully participating in the meeting. I was feeling just a bit under the weather and decided to stay home, which I think is a good idea for all of us, including himself. But let's go ahead and get started, call our meeting to order, and please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, will you call roll, please?
Ms. Connolly? Here. Mr. Duncan?
Here.
Ms. Hardy?
Here.
Ms. Leanne is absent. Ms. Shawns Hiscott, I believe, is running late but on her way. Mr. Snyder?
Here.
And Mayor Tarter.
Here.
Thank you, Council.
All right. Before we get to our proclamation, I know Ms. Hiscott wanted to be here for that as well. I just wanted to make note of the tragedy in Charlottesville. I know many of us in this room have personal connections there. Ms. Hardy's a graduate. Brian, you're a graduate. Mr. Shields is a graduate. I'm a graduate. Some of us have children there as well, Ms. Hiscott and myself. But no matter where you happen to be or what your connection is, it's just another horrible, senseless act of gun violence that we need to put an end to. But I asked maybe that we could all join together in a moment of silence to honor those who passed away and think of their families and those suffering right now. So if you could please join me in a moment of silence, I'd appreciate it. All right, thank you. Before we get on to adoption of the meeting agenda, I might suggest we move the proclamation till after the receipt of public comments, and Ms. Hiscott can join us for that. Does anyone have any issue with that? Yeah, so let's go ahead and do that if we can, but do we have a motion regarding the meeting agenda, maybe as with that change?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt the meeting agenda as.
All right.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The ayes have it. So let's go ahead and move on to oaths of office. Are there any oaths of office to administer, Madam Clerk?
I don't think any, oh,
Looks like we got one taker. Come on down.
if you'll raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Virginia, and that you will faithfully and impartially discharge and perform all the duties incumbent upon you as a member of the Library Board of Trustees according to the best of your ability, so help you God? I do. Thank you. And I think you're all set. Yeah, oh, here's a pen, and I think they'll want to, thank you.
To our community.
You to come up and. And this is Jessica Labukis, a new member on the library board.
All right, let's go on now to receipt of public comments. Do you want to summarize the written comments, Madam Clerk?
Dave Gustafson provided information about a pilot program for speed cameras in Fairfax County. Leslie Rye expressed dismay that Dominion has not repaired streetlights on Lawton Street. Nader Brook, regarding the West End Senior Housing Project, asked that council seek units or a mechanism by which funds could only be used for the proposed senior building. Henri Bartholomew urged council to adopt traffic calming measures selectively only where there is a demonstrated need and where benefits will exceed the cost. Sean Dakin reported several traffic issues in the downtown area. The Library Board of Trustees provided comment on the Park Avenue Great Streets project. Denise Kostbar objected to the height of the West End project and changes to the East Falls Church metro parking and bus bays. Dean DeBuck asked council to change zoning so the Falls Church Healthcare Clinic would be gone. Tiffany Murphy urged council to support $100,000 in the budget amendment for bike infrastructure. Joseph Shirizzi urged council to lower minimum parking requirements. Thomas Harvey wrote in support of the Byron Special Exception Amendment. Tim Stephen asked that the covered bike parking facility at City Hall be funded in the budget amendment. And in opposition of the T-zone changes were Ellen Gross, Jane Scully, Sally Phillips, and Peng Heinem. In support of 20-mile-per-hour speed limit is Bike Falls Church and Hans Miller, and Nancy Schneider opposed the 20-mile-per-hour speed limit.
All right, that's it for the written comments. All right, why don't we move on to the receipt of public comments now?
We have Joseph Shirizzi regarding the parking minimum.
All right, I would just ask if you could, all folks who are going to speak, to state your name and address for the record, and please keep your comments to 3 minutes so we can have time for everyone.
Thank you. Good evening, Council. My name is Joseph Shirizzi, Gundry Drive. My comments this evening do not represent any organization. They're just for myself. The Bike Falls Church membership has now reached about 200 people, most of them Falls Church residents, and has written in to strongly support 20 mile per hour speed limit. Most people hit by cars going 20 miles an hour survive. Most people hit by cars going 40 miles per hour die. All measures, there's a lot of evidence that shows putting in more slower, calmer streets is safer for kids getting to school, safer for people going about their days, and just greatly contributes to safer streets. That's why the state has given Falls Church the ability to lower our speed limits, and whenever the state gives us the ability to increase safety in our neighborhoods, we absolutely we have to do it. So greatly encourage council to seriously consider that. Regarding bike lanes in Falls Church, Washington, D.C. recently hit their yearly goal for how many bike lanes and miles of bike lanes that they're building in D.C. In 2020, Mayor Bowser said that over 3 years, they're going to set a goal of adding 100 miles of bike lanes in Washington, D.C. And so far, they're actually on track to hit that. I know, a local government on track to hit its goals. Crazy. But, in that time that D.C. has added dozens and dozens of miles of bike lanes, none have been built in Falls Church, and none have been built since in the last 20 years, since we've known how much bike lanes impact and have such a positive impact on our communities, and since they've been building them in DC. So, and Arlington, and connecting all the WOD trails to various cities in the region, Falls Church is significantly falling behind in the steps that we're taking to make our streets safer. And I think it's time to just set a specific goal, even if we don't know what that projects are going to be yet, but just set a goal like, okay, over the next 3 years or over the next 2 years, not, 10 or 20 year spans, but over the next 2 years, how many miles of bike lanes are we going to put in Falls Church? Maybe 3. Like that's not unattainable or unrealistic, I think. I also wanted to mention that a new bill in Richmond, of all places, is on the table at their city council to remove costly parking minimums. Below ground parking spaces cost $50,000 per space and are killing affordability and killing more housing projects in Falls Church. So if we want to be a climate leader, it's time to remove costly parking minimums too. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Clerk?
And we have Paul Rothstein is joining us virtually for public comment.
All right. Welcome, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to speak to the Falls Church City Council. My comments relate to another instance of Falls Church taking advantage of your neighbors in Fairfax County, as documented in tinyurl.com/Falls Church issues. I provide 2 examples of Falls Church City authorizing overnight or early morning weekend work with no consultation with Fairfax County and little notice to your neighbors less than 500 feet away from Mustang Alley and the Meridian Hill site. Now, we have seen the proposed tower that's part of the project on land that you currently own that HIT Construction is set to build next to the villages. I also document other issues from July, which I won't repeat here. People in the Drainsville district are noticing the way in which Falls Church City manipulates Fairfax County to our detriment. On the soon-to-be former Virginia Tech site, we don't want a tower that tall and that close to our residences. We don't want noise waivers to be granted, as another person said, like party favors. We do want information that we deserve, and you don't seem to care. Tomorrow, for the first time, Fairfax County is hosting a meeting which includes the proposed development at the Virginia Tech site. And a growing number of people are raising these issues with our current elected officials, John Faust and Jeff McKay, and we will do so with the future candidates for the open seat for Drainsville supervisor. Even 50 or 100 votes can make a difference in a Democratic primary that few people participate in. I hope that you will take your neighbors' issues seriously instead of trying to take advantage of us I hope that the Falls Church City Council will work with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Clerk?
And that's everyone that I have.
All right. So let's go on to council requests. Are there any council requests? And Mr. Shields is on the line, and Ms. Messner is here in the room. So are there any council requests for either of them? Mr. Duncan?
Just one quick one, in following on what Mr. Joseph said, Shirazi. There was an article in the Post about about the scooters that are getting back up and rolling again in the district, and it reminded me that we got ourselves pretty close to being fully scooter ready a couple of years ago, and then things happened. Anyway, I'd just like staff to dust off the documents and agreements and so forth that we were pursuing then, and see if we can introduce scooters in a more formal way back into the city.
Mr. Snyder?
Thank you very much. A couple things. First of all, I'd ask the city manager to respond to Mr. Rothstein on the question about night work and what we can do to ease the situation there for the neighbors. The second point I want to make is that a number of us, I think Councilmember Conley and I and city staff were on some Fairfax County sort of reviews of the Ring Road, and keep in mind that the city has been very well represented by the staff, including written comments and our presence on those calls that occurred last week, and I guess there's one more coming up this week. Third thing I want to mention is that NVTA is working on finalizing its long-range plan and set of projects, and the city has a number of projects that are in that plan, and we're working to make sure that that they remain so. And finally, applause to Councilmember Conley for a really wonderful job of planning and carrying out very meaningful Veterans Day ceremony. So thank you for that.
All right, thank you. Well said, Ms. Hardy, Vice Mayor Hardy.
Thank you. I will second the kudos from Ms. Connolly. Nice work. You worked really hard, and it was a well-done event. Mr. Snyder already covered my request on the overnight noise concern that just was discussed during public comment. And Mr. Shields, since we are 2 weeks out from our tree lighting event, I want to make sure that the city communications team is on track to communicate and publicize that event since we're off next week due to the holiday. That's it for me. Thank you.
All right. Other comments from anyone for the city manager? So I might suggest we move our proclamation after the report of the city manager. Is that okay with everyone here? Yeah. All right, let's go ahead and do that. So let's go on now to the report of the city manager. I know, Mr. Shields, a few questions were directed at you, and I know you have a report anyway. If you would be so kind, we'll turn the mic over to you and hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Mayor Tarter, members of council. It's nice to be with you virtually tonight. I will address the noise, or basically the noise ordinance waivers that are being authorized for the construction of Mustang Alley. There's also a noise waiver request for 1 day of a concrete pour at the West Falls project. So both of those noise waivers have been granted. In terms of the city's policy on granting noise waivers under the city code, the city manager is authorized to grant waivers. Our practice for that is we will grant waivers throughout the city for certain circumstances. And if the work involves water shutoffs or sanitary sewer shutoffs that impact a good number of businesses, it would require them to close. Sometimes we'll allow that work to happen at night. For larger mixed-use projects, where they have a large concrete pour that will require 12 hours in order so that they don't have joints at the wrong places for engineering and architectural stability. Sometimes we'll grant waivers so that they can start that work earlier so they can have a uniform monolithic pour per the architect's requirements. That is the case for a waiver that's been granted this week for construction work at West Falls. For Mustang Alley, that is a case where we've given permission to start work early in the morning, and that is largely driven by a desire to facilitate school operations on Mustang Alley in a safe manner, and also to get the road reconstructed as it needs to occur. We are very sensitive whenever we give a noise waiver anywhere in the city to resident concerns, and recognize that there needs to be a good reason for it, and any impacts for adjacent neighbors need to be mitigated to the best extent possible. For the work on Mustang Alley, no heavy, loud work is allowed to occur outside of the normal construction hours, but mobilization and lower decibel work is allowed to occur. So that request did come through our project manager, Mr. Millard. He consulted with me. We weighed the benefits and versus the impacts to this, and I did grant that waiver. If there are concerns about noise after a waiver has been granted, then we will try to work to address that with any residents that are impacted, and that's certainly our commitment and has been for years with these types of waivers. So that's my information on that. I'd be happy to answer any additional questions. I do have a couple of other things to report on, but maybe before I go on to those other items, I'll just pause to see if the City Council has any questions on the noise waiver process.
All right, doesn't look like there are any. Mr. Shields, please continue.
Okay. I will note that the Howard Herman Trail is going to be closed this week for repairs. We have been battling with the blue stone dust for years, which washes out and erodes into the streams and then requires us to go in and put more stone dust down. There's a new material that we hope is going to be more stable for that trail, and we will install that this week. We will need to ask for the public's forbearance for us while we undertake those trail repairs in Howard Herman Park. Our contractor did get delayed. I think the work was supposed to start this week. As soon as we get a firm date from our contractor, then we will publicize that date and post signs as well. We will have a East End area plan neighborhood meeting on November 19th. All are welcome to that. And information on the East End area plan can be found at the city's website at www.fallschurchva.gov. And I'll close just by noting several things about the holiday season coming up. And first is to promote the city's Economic Development Authority has a Little City gift card program, and sales will be open on Saturday, November 26th, and the public can go and purchase gift cards, and it's a great initiative to encourage people to shop local and shop Falls Church. And there's a bonus that comes with it, and we're using some of the ARPA dollars to help our local businesses with those bonuses. So if you purchase a $30 gift card that can be used right now we have over 30 Falls Church businesses that have signed up for this program. And if you use that card at one of the local businesses, a $30 gift card gets you a $15 added bonus that can be spent in Falls Church. A $50 gift card gets a $25 bonus, and a $100 gift card gets a $50 bonus. So those are all ways to try to help our local businesses as they're recovering from the pandemic, and also provide a benefit for consumers who are dealing with rising prices and inflation. So it's a great program rolled out by the EDA and being administered now by the city's Economic Development Office. Again, if you go to the city website, you can find out more information about that project and how you can acquire these gift cards. We will have the holiday street tree lighting ceremony on Monday, November 28th at 6 p.m. and it will be located this year at Founders Row. We've been holding that at Mr. Brown's Park for a number of years. We're going to shift it west because our tree lighting is extending a greater distance down Broad Street, and so we'll have a nice event there. Have the I think there's supposed to be an appearance by Santa Claus, with sponsored by the the volunteer fire department, and all are welcome to that. Again, that's the Monday after Thanksgiving, Monday, November 28th at 6 p.m. I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions.
All right, any follow-up questions for Mr. Shields, Mr. Duncan?
Just one, since we're not getting together again until the 28th, can you give us an update on the leaf pickup situation with the Department
Yes.
of Public Works?
So we are picking up leaves now. We have 2 crews out working every day. I ask all the public, look out for those crews. Please be safe when you see them out working on the street. And they do work long hours, and you might see them out at dusk or in twilight. So please give them plenty of space and room for them to be able to do their work. They're currently working south of Broad Street, and all people in the city can just keep your eye on social media, or just go to the city's website, and you can always find out week by week whether they're working on the south side of Broad Street, and then they'll alternate to the north side of Broad Street. So you can plan your leaf raking activities accordingly. We will be working hard to get the leaves up. It is a long process. We do expect it will go all the way through December to get the leaves up this year. And so I appreciate everyone's working with us on that.
Thank you. Other questions for Mr. Shields? All right, thank you. Now let's move back on to our proclamation, and Ms. Hiscott will do the honors, I believe.
Thank you. Whereas the Falls Church City Council supports the bodily autonomy and human dignity of all members of our community, and whereas the City Council shares the concerns expressed by many Virginians with the proposed model policies for transgender and gender-expansive students put forth recently by the Virginia Department of Education, and whereas the City of Falls Church School Board and Superintendent issued a joint statement on transgender rights in Falls Church City Public Schools on September 20th, 2022, which spoke out against the proposed model policies, assured the community of the Falls Church City Public Schools' commitment to value and support every student in their charge, and uphold settled law and FCCPS non-discrimination and anti-harassment policies. And whereas the City Council appreciates the school board's leadership in ensuring that all students are treated with dignity and respect in our schools. And whereas the City Council has demonstrated support for community members of all backgrounds and identities, including transgender, non-binary, and gender nonconforming persons, with Resolution 2010-13, a resolution in support of diversity, adopted March 22, 2010. And whereas City Ordinance 2002 prohibits discrimination based on sexual orientation, which has historically been linked to discrimination based on gender expression and identity. And whereas city-run programs, events, and activities are open for all to participate in a manner consistent with their gender identity. And whereas the Virginia Human Rights Act and court precedents make it clear that government agencies and public schools have a duty to respect the gender identity of transgender persons. And whereas the week of November 13th through 19th is celebrated as Transgender Awareness Week, which seeks to increase the visibility of transgender people and the issues they face, including but not limited to prejudicial treatment, lack of acceptance, and violence. And whereas Transgender Awareness Week culminates in the Transgender Day of Remembrance, the first organized in 1999 to commemorate the murder of Rita Hester, a transgender woman, and has grown into the recognition of the many transgender people lost to violence each year.
Now, therefore, I, David Tarter, Mayor of the City of Falls Church, Virginia, do hereby declare November 13th through the 19th, 2022, as Transgender Awareness Week, and Sunday, November 20th, 2022, as Transgender Day of Remembrance in City of Falls Church, and call upon the community to lift up the lives and voices of transgender people. Work towards eliminating discrimination against all transgender, gender expansive, and non-binary people, and honor the lives of those who have been lost to transgender violence this year and over the years. All right, thank you. I don't know if there's anyone in the audience who'd like to receive this proclamation. If there is, you're welcome to come up. Mr. Benton, I don't know if you'd like to come up, but,
I believe,
excuse me?
Sophie would be
Okay.
accepting it.
All right, come on up,
the city's
Sophie.
behalf.
You want to come up too, Mr. Benton? You're welcome to as well.
Can I say something? Do I introduce it? Do I come up first? Okay.
You're welcome to speak if you'd like.
Well, yeah, Andy introduced the ESC thing, so I wanted to, if that's okay. Okay. The thing is, it's hard to say the right thing. Like, we know the right thing, but it's hard to say it, especially on an issue like this, which is so nuanced. It's difficult to decide how much we want to give away to the world in fear of how it may be twisted against us. Do we quietly support in the hopes that it won't attract pushback from a prejudiced world? Or do we unequivocally stick up for the values we believe in? I think it's better to try and make mistakes along the way than to be silent, so I'm going to try to speak to this proclamation today. I'm not trans myself, but as a member of the queer community, I have a deep affinity and connection with the trans community. I know that coming out is a hard decision, and being out is often even harder. I know that it shouldn't be something that distinguishes the queer community, especially transgender people, from others in society, any more than saying you're from Fairfax County versus the city of Falls Church. But that is not the case. In the world we live in, we know that being trans often comes with a lot of pain, and through this proclamation, we acknowledge that. We recognize the violence that society inflicts on transgender people, and we honor the memory of those we've lost to transphobia and bigotry. At the same time, we cannot forget the joy and beauty of the transgender experience. The pain I've just mentioned doesn't come from being trans, but from the lack of understanding and the inability to accept trans people as equally deserving of life and autonomy. The trans experience itself is amazing. There's nothing more fulfilling than watching another human being discover who they are and come into their own. There's no one way to be trans, and there's no one journey to becoming who you were meant to be. And through the varying experiences of our trans community members, we are reminded of the beauty of diversity. The more we cherish the diversity of gender and gendered experience, the more opportunity we give to our community members to be who they are without a second thought. Not only do we welcome trans community members when we defend their right to live here, but we welcome and free everyone who lives in this community from the shackles of the traditional gender binary system. And that's one of the most beautiful things about the trans community. The fight for their rights brings not only peace and power to their cause, but acceptance and freedom for all gender identities and expressions, trans, cis, or otherwise. So I want to ask you, finally, to imagine the reactions you expect to receive from this proclamation, namely the negative, because that is what I've heard the most about when we wrote this proclamation. Think for a moment about your worst fears of who may hear this and what they may do. Think not as a servant of the City of Falls Church, not as a council member or representative of the community, but as an individual. Imagine yourself as one person bearing the brunt of societal rejection of who you are at your very core. Can you carry that weight alone? It's one thing to stand up to transphobia as a united community, and another to face it alone as a personal attack. And so while we may face bigoted responses, I want to highlight that we will face them together. This proclamation demonstrates that as representatives of the city, as a workplace, and as a whole community, we will help lift the weight from our trans community members who for so long have carried it alone. I have one more part. And this is not the end. This proclamation is not the solution to our problem, but a stepping stone on the way. If we said nothing, this hate would continue to exist. And even though we are saying something now, this hate will continue to exist. The fight for trans rights has been going on for decades in the United States and won't soon be won if we continue to take half measures and backslide into silence. This region is making progress, though. From the Falls Church City School System's commitment to serving its students with respect and dignity, to the welcoming leadership in city-led programs that respect the gender identity of all participants. With this proclamation, we encourage these measures and commit ourselves to continuing to do the work that will ensure that Falls Church is a welcoming and inclusive community that thrives with the acceptance and involvement of all its residents.
I think you found the right words, Sophie. Come on up. Great. No, you keep that. Go ahead. You keep it. Thank you again for those heartfelt remarks. I think they're deeply moving to all of us. All right. Let's go ahead and, what's that? Yes.
We're so proud that you are part of the City of Falls Church.
All right. Let's go on now to business on the agenda. The first item, would you call that, Madam Clerk?
Mayor,
Yes.
if I could interrupt and we go back to the city manager's report so we can have the presentation from our NVTC representatives that are here this evening.
Gotcha.
Thank
Okay,
you.
absolutely. Let's go ahead. You want to introduce them?
I believe Carrie Ottonino is still on the meeting, and Mr. Shields and I were going to defer to her for a brief intro, and then we'll have the presentation.
All right.
Yes, hi, I'm Carrie Odnino. Good evening, Mayor Tarter and members of City Council. So Council is requested to hear a presentation from the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission regarding the Bus Rapid Transit Envision Route 7 Phase 441 Mobility Analysis Study. The Envision Route 7 project proposed by NVTC is being designed to improve transit operations along the Route 7 corridor from the Spring Hill Road Metro Station in Tysons through the City of Falls Church, with a connection to the East Falls Church Metro Station to the Mark Center in Alexandria. There have been 3 phases of the study already completed, and NVTC, in coordination with jurisdictional staff, is currently working on Phase 4.1 of the Bus Rapid Transit Study, which is looking at mobility benefits and impacts resulting from the proposed BRT from Tysons to Seven Corners, and includes the development of a traffic microsimulation model. So this presentation from NVTC is a follow-up on the community meeting that was held on October 11th, 2022 at Meridian High School, and included an update on potential BRT infrastructure elements for the Falls Church segment of the BRT route, as well as existing conditions for bus ridership, bus speeds, and vehicle level of service. Ultimately, the idea is for these studies to lead to the Route 7 BRT being built at an estimated total cost of construction of about $450 to $500 million in 2030 dollars. And the current optimistic estimate for start of service for the Bus Rapid Transit project on Route 7 is 2031. So with that, I would like to introduce Xavier Harmony, who is Senior Program Manager for the Transit Resource Center at the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, to provide a brief presentation and update on the Phase 4.1 study and Envision Route 7 project.
All right, welcome. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having us. First, good evening. Thank you for having us this evening to talk about this project. It's a really important project, and Falls Church has been a particularly important partner throughout the length of this project so far. So next slide, please. So I'm going to start by giving a little bit of an overview of what Bus Rapid Transit, or BRT, is, just so that we're talking the same language as I go through my slides. And then I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of the project itself, some of the current work, and then we'll be moving on as next steps. So what is Bus Rapid Transit, or BRT? Next slide, please. Yep. So basically, Bus Rapid Transit is a high-capacity, high-quality bus transit system. The point is to have fast and reliable transit service, bus service specifically. I like to think of BRT as a toolbox of treatments. So you can have multiple parts, different ways of improving bus service. For example, you might have dedicated right-of-way, higher frequency service, transit signal priority, where you give more green time to a bus going through an intersection, for example, upward fare collection, enhanced stations, all different elements that could improve bus service. And you can use this toolbox of different infrastructure and policy elements to create better service. Some parts and areas might be able to use some elements, and some areas might be able to use others. You can pick and choose from this toolbox as needs dictate. Next slide, please. So there are a variety of BRT systems around the United States already, and treatments, BRT treatments around the United States are even more frequent. So we have some local examples. For example, red bus lanes in Washington, D.C. These pictures on this slide here show you some examples of rapid bus BRT treatments around the country. For a local example of BRT, we have Metroway in Arlington and Alexandria, where you can see some of these treatments in action, including level boarding, TSP, the transit signal priority, red bus lanes, and GITC has most recently opened their red bus lanes, their BRT, about 3 years ago. An important thing to mention about these is that they work best when used together. So having a red bus lane with transit signal priority, for example, the benefit of those two treatments together is better than them individually. So as many you can put together is the purpose and goal of BRT. So moving on to the project itself. Next slide, please. So this map here shows our latest iteration of what our proposed alignment will look like. So as mentioned, this is going from Marks Center to Tyson's Corner, or Tyson's, via East Falls Church Metro Station. So it's worth pointing out this is the second busiest bus ridership corridor in Northern Virginia, and it was really resilient throughout the pandemic. It's already at 90% of pre-pandemic ridership, and even though buses overall being more resilient than other modes of transit, this corridor has been particularly strong. Some of the benefits of this project for the region include connecting equity communities to jobs and activity centers, as well as creating more opportunities for many of the people who live along the corridor. We have been working with a variety of partners throughout this process, including MBTA, DIPT, VDOT, as well as the four jurisdictions this project touches, including Fairfax County, the city here, Arlington County, and the city of Alexandria. Next slide, please. So as already mentioned, we've gone through a few phases already with this project. We started with identifying transit options, selected BRT as the best proposed solution, considering all the alternatives. Phase 3, which we finished in 2019, we developed the BRT concept with conceptual engineering and preliminary cost estimates. And right now we're assessing mobility benefits, especially focusing on Falls Church, a segment from around Route 66 down to Seven Corners. I'll touch on that more in a moment. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is the study that we are doing right now, focusing on the mobility benefits and opportunities in this Falls Church region. So we're focusing, the overall BRT corridor is about 14 miles, and we're focusing just on the 3.5 mile segment right here in Falls Church, and a little bit in Arlington County. We are particularly focusing on this area because of the connection to East Falls Church Metro Station. This is one of the highest ridership areas of the whole corridor as a result of that. We recognize this is a constrained segment. There's limited right-of-way, and there's a lot of constraints working within the City of Falls Church with the road constraints we have. However, we want to ensure that there is good transit service for the residents of Falls Church, as well as people who want to go to, from, and through this region. And so we have three objectives of this study. We're looking to understand the mobility benefits of BRT, so the service itself, help the public better understand BRT. It's been a little while since we talked about this project in public, and then test multiple BRT concepts. Next slide, please. So we're really particularly focusing on infrastructure elements here. So this includes what are called bus access and transit lanes. So you might think of red bus lanes. These are slightly different because they allow right turn traffic. So these lanes sort of hug the curb and allows traffic who are turning right turns into businesses or into side streets to allow those lanes for those turning movements, but predominantly it's used by bus lanes. There's transit signal priority, where basically the bus talks to the traffic signal to say basically that I'm running late or I need more time, and the traffic signal, if it can, will give more green time to the bus to allow it to pass through, or will shorten the red phase if it's approaching and allow it to speed through as well. And then finally, bus queue jumps, where basically a bus sits on the right turn lane in a little pocket there and is allowed a signal to get in front of traffic at an intersection. These are different types of infrastructure treatments. None of these are necessarily guaranteed or certain for Falls Church. These are ideas that we're exploring. As I said before, BRT is a toolbox of ideas, and we're picking from that toolbox to see what might or might not work in this particular region. Next slide, please. So this is a summary of some of our results so far. So first of all, this is showing existing conditions. This is understanding where we are before we actually do our analysis of testing different BRT options. This slide here shows you the ridership in the region. Basically, the bigger the circle, the more ridership. And as you can see in this slide, there's a really big circle around East Falls Church, but there's strong ridership along this corridor, even throughout in Falls Church. And like I said, the current ridership is at 90% of pre-pandemic levels. So this is 2019 ridership, and we're almost at these levels even today. Next slide, please. This is one of those important slides that we've, one of the important findings we've had from the existing conditions report so far. This is using data from Metro, from WMATA, showing the 28A bus speeds. The 28A is the primary route that goes through this corridor right now. And as you can see on this slide, the darker colors, the red colors, indicate slower speeds, while the lighter green colors indicate faster speeds. Buses get really slowed down through East Falls Church, especially as you're making that turn off Route 7 towards East Falls Church Metro Station. It's both an AM and PM problem, as this slide shows. And I believe this road here is 25 miles per hour, so you can really see how much buses get slowed down here. A big value of BRT is not just the potential to improve ridership in the region, but you can improve the actual quality of transit service. People who use the transit service today still need good bus service, and a BRT, the elements that come with BRT can really improve the quality of bus transit service, help them get to their jobs and homes faster, get to whatever they want to do faster, and have higher quality service. Next slide, please. And finally, this is vehicle level of service. So this is just a concept of showing how well vehicles are using this system. Basically, there are different levels of service using a grading scale, so fairly straightforward to understand that A and B and C are better than D and E and F. Mostly through this corridor using existing condition data, we see that it's mostly in level of service A, B, or C. While there are some areas in the corridor, some intersections that are in the D or E, these are the heaviest impact movements here are actually movements trying to get onto 66 using the on and off ramps there, so they don't really affect the bus operations in this corridor. But mostly, while bus service is really impacted, car traffic is not impacted as much in this corridor. Next slide, please. All right, and next steps. So this is a fairly busy slide because I tried to be as comprehensive for this audience as I could. But for the mobility study, the next steps are basically just finishing the analysis of different alternatives of BRT, what might be built out in the future. And then we're going to come out with more public outreach for this community and our neighbors in Fairfax and Arlington County to talk about what some of these options might look like and what the impacts are to both BRT and to traffic. At the same time as this, we're working on a strategic implementation plan. So this is a separate effort that's happening at the same time, different consultants, and the purpose of that is to look at project governance, implementation, and strategic funding decisions. When do we need money? When do we apply for it? Who's going to take over the project as it goes to construction? MTC is not a transit operator. We are doing the studies and the planning, but we don't run transit. So who's going to take it over when? Those are the kinds of questions we're going to get out of this. And when we're going to finish these final phases of the project work, preliminary engineering, NEPA, which is the environmental work, all the way through to construction and implementation and running the buses. So we are at the moment going through some stakeholder engagement with senior transportation leaders that are touched by this corridor. We talked to Falls Church staff just last week, and we'll be engaging them further as we figure out exactly how these final steps will look like. And like I said, We will be having more public outreach for the mobility study in the spring, so please keep an eye out for anything that might come from us or from Falls Church staff as we put out the message. We're anticipating that hitting around May, next public meeting. And that is it for me. I will welcome any questions if you have any.
All right, thank you very much for that very comprehensive presentation and all the hard work you all have done to get us where we are today. I'm going to let Mr. Snyder go first. He's our resident transportation expert. Dave, do you have any thoughts or questions?
Only that I'd like to get it done a lot sooner. Thanks to everybody involved. Thanks for being here, and I look forward to any questions from City Council. Thank you.
All right, other folks? Mr. Duncan?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've sat through a good many presentations on BRT, not as many as Mr. Snyder, of course. I think the important thing to get across to our constituency here is that we want to participate in this. We want to be part of a regional transit operation that's not the Metro. Nothing wrong with Metro, but, that runs along our streets and picks people up and drops people off at their homes and jobs and businesses. So all good for that. Later on tonight, we're going to be talking about lowering the speed limit here on some streets. Some folks would like us to lower it on all streets. I just wonder if you could offer some thoughts about, on the one hand, bus rapid. Rapid is in its name. I mean, it wants to go faster to get people where they want to go sooner so that they'll use mass transit instead of personal vehicles. And yet, at the same time, there's pressure for things to go less rapidly here in town. I wonder if anything that we have in the BRT literature speaks to improvements in pedestrian safety and, the kind of atmosphere of cycling and walking that we're trying to encourage here at the same time that we're going to bring BRT in.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's honestly a topic I could talk about a lot. It's a really interesting topic. I think it's worth starting by pointing out that the slide showing the bus speeds showing that even if you double the speeds for buses in some of these slower segments, you're still below the current speed limit, and there's a lot of opportunity to improve speeds even if you reduce speed limits. Just because buses are so slow, I appreciate you coming back to that slide. Bus speeds are slowed down so much in this corridor that you could increase speed significantly and still be fine with addressing those other mobility concerns in the corridor. Pedestrian and bicycle accommodations are really important, and ensuring pedestrian safety is accounted for early is an important part of this project. We are talking about, throughout this corridor, pedestrian, some places we might have BRT center running, where you might have to go cross the road to get to the station. Sometimes it might be curb running, so you might not have to cross the road to access a station. There are benefits and negatives to both of those situations, but understanding the pedestrian experience is really important, that everyone who is a transit rider is at some point a pedestrian, and that's a really important part of transit planning, and it's a really important part that we're considering here. I will also say that the bicycle network is a really important part of this. I know there's some bike planning happening right now in Falls Church. I know Virginia Tech is helping out with some of this. Bicycle planning and the bicycle infrastructure is really important for adding a first mile, last mile connection to the BRT. This BRT network doesn't go to West Falls Church, for example, but it's a great opportunity to have that first mile, last mile connection with bike facility and bike connections. So having an overall slower traffic network can actually allow bus and pedestrians and bikes to work better together to create a more unified network that is it's slower than the traffic, but it allows them to work better together. Does that answer your question?
If you can answer tonight, you're an all-powerful. No, that's a good thought, though. Just the difference between center running and curb running is interesting. I have no idea where we're going in Falls Church with this. I mean, I think people are going to have some pretty strong opinions. I haven't made up my mind. I'd like to hear the debate, but I think whatever we do, we want. I hear you saying that we want a system that runs in a more fluid manner, if not exceedingly that much faster. I mean, we're not talking about, a bus that's barreling down Broad Street at, 55 miles an hour. That's not what BRT means. And I think if that's the message, if we can come out with a message that makes that clear, I think that will improve its acceptance here. But it could, lead to some significant changes in the architecture of our main street, Broad Street, which, maybe the time for that is coming.
To add to that point, as an example, I talked to some of the folks in Richmond with their BRT system. They were talking about how their BRT improved transit time by 65%. If you have segments of road where you are traveling at 10 miles per hour, you're going up to 16.5 miles per hour. That's a 65% increase. That's not exactly going super fast, but it's a huge improvement overall if you're looking at a corridor or a network. And so you can have really large, significant improvements where people use transit without actually barreling through the street, as you mentioned. So there are really good opportunities here to improve transit services without necessarily having a disproportionate risk to vulnerable road users.
Vice Mayor Hardy?
Thank you for the presentation. That's terrific. So going back to the slide we're on slide 11, I think is one that has the different elements of what BRT could look like in Falls Church. When will the community, I guess, know what combination of things or what it'll actually look like on the ground? Is that at the end of this phase 4 in June 2023? Is it further in the time frame?
Yeah, so what we're going to use right now is use this information to figure out a couple of different alternatives that will come back to this community in May to show them this is the result of a couple of different ways of looking at this. So I believe we've got 2 or 3 different alternatives we're looking at, and each alternative is informing the next one. So basically, we are starting with using what we used, came out of phase 3 with some ideas of what it might look like, run that through our models, and then using that information to figure out, okay, where can we perhaps add more elements, or where is it perhaps too much of an impact on existing traffic conditions, and then make a new alternative based on that feedback. So ultimately, we'll come back with different 2 or 3 different options to this community in May. Through that process, where we'll have different ideas we looked at that impacts both the transit operations as well as the car operations, but that won't mean we'll be necessarily coming to a decision at the end of this project phase. This will be informing our next work, which will be preliminary engineering and environmental work, where that's when we'll be making those final decisions. That's when we actually are going, okay, this is the yay, nay kind of decision. This is more of an information thing, figuring out what is the impact and what is it likely we're going to be looking at. We aren't making any decisions in this phase. It's going to be more like, sometime in the next phase or 2, but that won't even be beginning until next year at the earliest.
Great. We look forward to welcoming you back in May then. Thank you.
All right. I've got a question or two for you, maybe even more of a comment. So I was going to ask you about West Falls Church Metro. I think you've answered that question, unfortunately, not as I would like to have it answered. I think it's a huge mistake not to have this go to the metro stations. The notion that, some 80-year-old person is going to walk half a mile in 90-degree heat or jump on a bike, it's just such a missed opportunity. It's a mistake. It's not accurate. And you're that close. It's like going, taking the metro to the airport and stopping a mile away from the airport. I mean, why? So we've tried to design our roads so that you guys can navigate it. We're in the process right now of putting things together. We're talking to our neighbors about it, making sure that people can have access to metro. But is that decision final? And if not, I just urge you to find a way to get those buses to where they need to go.
We aren't looking at alternative alignments at this time, but we definitely appreciate that comment, and we'll definitely be thinking about it as we progress through the preliminary engineering, which is our next design phase.
Yeah, I've been making that comment for like 7 years, so I'm sure it'll get as much deference as it got the last 7 times. I got to tell you, though, this is just a mistake I think this region has made with transit, just close but no bullseye, and a lot of things we've done. Parking garages next to metro, not buildings, just kind of you're really close, you spend billions of dollars in these huge infrastructure projects, and then you get it 90% right and you miss that last little leg. But the notion that people are going to walk or bike or take their briefcase and put it whatever, just take it to the metro station. That's where people want to go, right? That's where we're trying to have multimodal transit. So anyway, whatever that's worth, I'm sure I'll see you in 7 years and it's more the same. But anyway, that's all I got on that one. Anyone else have any comments? All right. Well, let's we're not taking comment. Well, I guess this is actually not a public hearing, so I'm going to go ahead and maybe ask you to hold that thought for our next meeting. But anyway, listen, thank you so much for your time here this evening, and we look forward to hearing more from you.
Thank you for having us, and if you have any questions later on, please feel free to email me or contact me.
All right, thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor, let me just commit that I'll follow up on all the inquiries and questions, including yours, about serving the West Falls Church. And I think we need to bring that up with our development partners as well to see how that could be done from the standpoint of engineering that boulevard effect. Finally, I think there are three elements to this transit system that are important to us. First of all, equity. It serves a wide area of Northern Virginia with very diverse populations. Secondly, it would be very good for the environment, reducing the number of cars and improving service. And with the Silver Line finally opening up, this will provide more service to get people to East Falls Church, where they can then go to Dulles. And that offers a whole better opportunity for citizens of Falls Church and our surrounding areas. And third, I think it'll be great for economic development. It'll make it far easier for people to get here to patronize our businesses. So thanks very much, and I'll follow up on these. I look forward to further community discussion. Thank you.
All right, thanks again. And again, we don't do public comment on non-public hearing matters, so thank you. Hold the thought. We look forward to hearing more from you, and again, for our colleagues here as well. So let's go ahead and move on to business on the agenda. Again, thanks for coming out. Look forward to further reports. Madam Clerk, will you call the first item, please?
TO 22-16 is an ordinance to increase the salaries for the City of Falls Church mayor and city council members.
Who's doing the staff report? Either Mr. Shields, Ms. Mester? Who's
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I think the city manager will be doing the report.
All right, Mr. Shields, are you there?
Good evening. Yes. Can you all hear me?
We can.
Okay. I'll just provide a short report. And what's before council tonight is an ordinance that would increase the salaries for mayor and council members effective on July 1st, 2024, or 18 months from now. Under this proposed ordinance, the salary for mayor would increase from $9,800 to $11,500, and the salary for city council members would increase from $9,200 to $11,000. The effective date of the proposed salary changes is the year after the next city council election. State law regulates permissible salary levels for local elected officials, along with the procedures for amending such salaries. And this ordinance reflects all those state code provisions. I'll stop there and be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you so much. Any questions for Mr. Shields? Ms. Connolly? Okay, just reaching for the mic. Any comments from anyone? Any public comment? Seeing none, the matter is closed to the public. Mr. Snyder?
Thanks a lot, Mr. Mayor. So I don't have any real objection to the increase in salary. I think it's been, decades since that, and I think all the city council members work really, really hard and are probably earning less than the minimum wage or even less than that. So I don't have any problem with that. I'm voting no, though, because of the staff report where there's a discussion of benefits, which I think should not be done as a matter of administrative fiat, but should be legislated. And there are a number of reasons for that. One of them is, are we opening ourselves up to retroactive liability? Because if this, in fact, was the case all along and these benefits were not made clear to prior city council members, are we therefore opening up ourselves up to retroactive liability? So I have a lot of problems with that particular element. I think it does lack transparency. I don't think it's the way to do it. So that's why I'll be voting no on this, to make a point about that particular element of the presentation and this sort of administrative interpretation, which frankly is dramatically different from what prior city council members, including prior city council members, were never informed that they had the opportunity to participate in those benefits. So for these reasons, I'll be voting no on this, to make the point about the lack of transparency and concern with the benefits, which if every city council member took advantage of, as the staff report indicates, would be $147,000 cost, which I don't think ought to be an additional cost, which I don't think ought to be imposed as a matter of just sort of administrative rethinking of what, or allegedly of what was there. So, thanks.
All right, thank you. Other comments? Mr. Duncan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With the mayor, I am the second longest-serving member of council, and I would like to confess guilt to not having raised this question so that we understood that existing administrative regulations would have bestowed benefits on elected members of council. And in order to atone for that oversight over almost 10 years, I intend to vote for this, that, and also I think just simple adjustment for inflation to the salary, which I believe was set in the, golly, mid-2000s sometime, 15 years or so ago, would take us up to at least this number, I think. So I'll be voting for this for those two reasons.
All right, are there other comments? I think this brings us up to 9 cents an hour, if I'm not mistaken. Ms. Hiscott?
You can figure out how I can earn minimum wage at this job. Please let me know.
Ms. Hiscott?
I just want to state my support. Like, I wish that the Commonwealth allowed us to increase the salary to a wage that would allow more people to run for office and serve on the dais. The current rate does not afford someone who needed to pay for childcare, for instance, to even cover that during the course of a year of serving on council. So I will be voting to support it, and I just want the record to reflect that I would support additional increase in that, and with the intent of bringing more voices onto city council and having more people afford to be able to run for city council. Thank you.
All right, Vice Mayor Hardy.
Thank you. I've spoken plenty about this, so I will not belabor the point, but I just second what Ms. Hiscott said. Thank you.
Any other comments? Do we have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt TR 22-16.
We have a
Second.
Ms. Connolly on the second. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
No.
And Mayor Tarter.
Yes.
The motion carries.
All right, let's keep moving.
So this is TO 22-21, an ordinance to amend Chapter 26, Motor Vehicles and Traffic, Article 1 of the Code of the City of Falls Church to provide authority to the city manager to reduce the speed limit on certain local city streets to 20 miles per hour.
All right, Mr. Shields, are you introducing this matter?
I am, and I believe the chief of police is on the call as well. And Mr. Bradley's on vacation. I haven't looked on Teams as to whether he tuned in for this. So let
I think
me.
it's a beer opening someplace on a beach somewhere.
So what is before council is on an ordinance, a proposed ordinance that is before council on a potential first reading tonight, with a public hearing and potential second reading at your next meeting on November 28th. And what is before the council is a proposal to, by ordinance, authorize the city manager to reduce the speed limit on certain local streets to 20 miles per hour. What is currently the case is that these streets are currently regulated at 25 miles per hour. Due to the science behind the damage caused to humans from speeding vehicles, an accident at 20 miles per hour is usually a survivable accident, whereas at higher speeds, going up to 30 and 35 miles per hour, the damage is much more severe. And for our smaller residential streets, the geometry of those streets and the design of those streets supports a 20 mile per hour speed limit. Some of our streets that are characterized as collector streets, such as West Street or Great Falls Street or Hillwood, would remain at 25 miles per hour. In the future, if those streets undergo traffic calming measures or redesign that would support a 20 mile per hour speed limit, then we would be able to revisit that question at that time. As an example of that, in the staff report is the map of the streets that would remain at 25 miles per hour, and among those streets listed in that map is Park Avenue. With the plans for Park Avenue, with the changes to slow traffic and increase pedestrian safety and bicycling safety on Park Avenue, we believe that after that project is complete, that it would be appropriate to lower the speed limits there to 20 miles per hour, as an example. I will stop there. Be happy to answer any questions on this ordinance. It is before the City Council on a first reading tonight. It would go out to the community for comment and then come back for second reading at your meeting after Thanksgiving. The implementation of this ordinance, if it is adopted, we would think it would take a couple of months. Our intention would be to go out and change the signs and also have a great deal of public notice of this in advance. The goal is not to write speeding tickets. The goal is to change driver behavior and to improve safety in the city, and particularly on our smaller residential streets. Chief Gavin, is there anything you would like to add?
I guess the only thing I would add, Wyatt, is in terms of changing driving behavior, part of this would be a public outreach with a lot of work by the Office of Communications, and then we've been working with Public Works quite a bit, trying to understand how we can come at this as partners. Certainly the police department and the sheriff's office would be out there with our radar trailers, and also the community vehicle that we put out. But there would be a lot of public outreach and a campaign to ensure the community knew of the changes and in hopes of changing the behavior before enforcement.
All right, thank you. Questions, comments from up here? Vice Mayor Hardy?
Thank you. Your point about kind of the education opportunity really is important, so let's emphasize that as if this gets adopted, to make sure we do that wide and far in the community. The second point is I read the very detailed letter we got about advocating for kind of one zone, and a lot of the points in there really resonate. I think it's a lot less sign clutter, it's simpler to understand, it's simpler to enforce. And so while I understand the challenges with getting obviously Route 7, Route 29, getting VDOT involved, and then even those Zone 2 collector streets. I'd like for us to be clear, though, is that we'd like to get to as few zones as possible. Correct, Mr. Shields? Like, the intent is to get those collector streets like Great Falls West, Hillwood, et cetera, to 20 miles an hour. And so can we commit to that as, you know, the goal is at the minimum, we're going to have all the neighborhood streets to be 20 miles an hour. We like to get the collector streets also 20 miles an hour, and we will commit dollars to traffic calming, re-engineering, kind of other kind of work to kind of get our roads to be a place where 20 miles an hour is actually feasible, and set kind of a target of when we like to get there. I don't want to just kind of adopt something with 3 zones out there and it just stays 3 zones indefinitely, when ultimately I think the goal of prioritizing safety should be across the entire city and not a tiered system.
All right.
I think that just to respond to that briefly, we could work with council to set some goals in that area, and I need to work with Public Works just in terms of the time frame for that. But we'd be happy to get back to council to continue that discussion.
Thank you.
Mr. Duncan?
I could ask a question of the chief about the streets that are categorized as coordination category streets. I assume that sort of falls in your lap in terms of enforcing speed limits on streets that bound the county and the Arlington County and Fairfax County?
The streets between Fairfax and Arlington, like Lincoln, that goes into Arlington County.
I'm looking at the map here. Any street that's marked red, it looks like.
Right.
You know what? Yes, I think is the short answer to your question, but it's around the borders. There are several squiggly streets. Highland coming down from the metro. There's a that area, all along Hillwood, the streets that feed into our Hillwood Avenue are marked in red. I just wonder,
Right.
I remember seeing maps like this going back to the mid-'80s when I first got on the CACT, and I'm not sure that I remember seeing the coordination category. I just wonder what that means.
Well, I do believe what what they'll have to coordinate with is the speed limits on the main arterials to those streets, and where the signs are placed are specific to our enforcement efforts. As far as it relates to other jurisdictions and how some roads go into other jurisdictions, we don't have much of a problem in terms of enforcing. You know, the city, as far as the city enforcement is concerned, we can enforce up to a mile into the counties. The counties can enforce up to 300 yards into the city. But if we have a violation that originates in the city, we can actually follow them into the county and actually stop them and write them for that violation. As far as with DPW coordinating, you know, say for instance, if on Washington Street it's 30 miles an hour or 25 miles an hour at any given point, you turn off onto a side street and it goes into 20, we would want to make sure that the signs are at a place where they are seen and that the officers would be able to enforce it. You know, I'm looking at the map and it's moving around. I can't see it completely, but for the most part, it's actually it will be a strategy with DPW and the police department to ensure we know where the signs are going and exactly how we can enforce it. And if that answers your question,
Okay,
I'm
yeah.
not
So
sure.
I actually didn't know that business about us able to pursue that deep into the county. So a street like Roosevelt Street, which sort of straddles the county and the city, is actually a street that we could enforce without need of any involvement from Arlington, according to what you've said. So that's good, I think.
And just note that I didn't use the word pursuit, and I know you used it just in jest, but we would not pursue, but we would follow them and stop them.
Pursue is a
And make
too
make enforcement.
aggressive a sounding word. That's right. The only other thought I guess I have is that I hear where Ms. Hardy's comments are going, and I think that's the direction in which we indeed do want to go. We don't want to, at least I don't want to see, you know, even more signs go up in the city. We love our signs here, I know, but in the long run, you know, we would not look to enforcement as the prime means of ensuring safe traffic speeds. We would hope that the characteristics of the street, traffic calming devices, et cetera, would preclude the need for the police department to follow anybody who is speeding. So that is our long-term goal, to achieve a safe speed limit, which is just from the back of my envelope, going to be something in between 20 and 25 in most parts of the city. I'm going to support this tonight, I think, with the understanding that we are in the business of promoting mobility for all modes, and that's pedestrians and cyclists and hopefully scooters someday soon, and also cars. I mean, there's no getting around the fact that, at least for the foreseeable future, there's going to be tens of thousands of cars going through Falls Church every day, and we need a more aggressive posture on correcting roads that were designed for higher speeds down to something that is more friendly to pedestrians, cyclists, scooters, and just safer for, you know, all vehicles that moves around somewhere between 20 and 25, I think. Okay, thanks.
All right.
I would agree with that, but unfortunately, the foundation of our enforcement would be that we would need signs, particularly if it's changing speed limits.
Yeah, I understand that.
Sure.
I don't expect to live in a world where we won't have signs.
Yeah.
Ms. Conley?
Thanks for this, Chief Gavin. I just have two questions. And one is, as I read through the report, I was just looking for, is there a downside to switching to 20 mile per hour? There didn't seem to be anything in the report that said, these are reasons why you might not want to change the speed limit.
That may be better served in asking the traffic engineers, but in terms of the enforcement piece, the only downside, I think, is getting us to a place where, the signage is strategically set so that we can enforce it, particularly when it goes from one zone to another zone. We have to make sure that, that at least somebody has noticed that it is 20 miles an hour as they're entering a 20 mile an hour zone, and that we give them ample time to see that for us to react and enforce it. The downside, I don't really think it's a huge downside. If anything, there's more pros than cons. And in the communities around us, I haven't heard a lot of down sides to it either. I know that Arlington started it in their school zones, and specifically in the neighborhoods, they've put it where there are the blinking signs, and they've also indicated with along the lines of when the schools are opening and closing. But I don't necessarily think there's that many downsides to this yet that I'm aware of.
Thank you. And then my other question is just around the markings on some of the streets. Like in that lower left, there's that little jiggity jag that's green off of Rosemary below Gibson. I think that's
right.
I think that's a townhouse parking lot almost. Or Walden, that's in the center, that's a cul-de-sac. So I don't know I'm assuming the GIS did this map?
Yes.
And I'm wondering if will there be opportunities to revise it as we go?
Certainly.
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks for all the great comments from council, and I totally agree with the comments that everybody has made. I'll just make 4 quick points. First of all, as we're reminded virtually every city council session that the number one safety concern of our citizens is with the out-of-control traffic on our streets. Secondly, the physics is very clear that this will improve safety if a collision between a vehicle and a person happens, and that occurs at a lower speed. Third, it will make our streets safer for pedestrians and bicyclists. And fourth, Richmond is pretty stingy about giving us any authority on traffic safety, so it's a good idea to use what we're given. And fifth, regarding to the signs, I think they do 2 things. First of all, they give legal notice about the speeds, but they also help illustrate the point that we're very serious about traffic safety here. So for all those reasons, I would support this and hope that we do have a goal of 100% sooner rather than later. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any member of the public wish to speak to this matter? Seeing none, the matter is closed to the public. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I move to grant first reading to TO 22-21, schedule second reading and final consideration for November 28, 2022, and advertise the same according to law.
All right,
Second.
do we have- sorry, who was the second?
Second.
Ms. Hardy on the second. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Sean Siscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
And Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
The motion carries.
All right, thank you. Next item? Sure.
Mr. Shields, so before second reading, given that there's council support to kind of outline the path and goal to get more of our streets to 20 miles an hour, do we think that's realistic to have before we take this up at the end of the month?
I don't want to promise that. That may involve, quite a bit of just projecting what the engineering costs would be and sort of how we would go about that. So I might need to have a little bit more time to have that proposal for the city council.
Okay, I think that's fair, but I think it's clear that the policy direction we want to head is kind of a more simple and elegant solution where more of our streets are at 20 miles an hour. Thank you.
All right, next item.
I'm sorry, could I make a request when we come back for second reading? It's about the section of South Washington Street that is posted at 30. I would like to understand a little bit better why that shouldn't be set at 25, just like the rest of Washington and Broad Street too. I mean, if anything, the incline of the roadway coming down from Graham Road into the city encourages speeds well in excess of 30 miles an hour. I mean, all you have to do is stand there and see, there are trucks barreling down there at 50 miles an hour. Just wonder is there any particular reason that we could not uniform our signs a little bit by getting rid of that 30 and making it 25 there? I just wonder if we could explore that before we do second reading.
That I can get an answer to you before second reading.
Okay.
Good point.
All right, let's move on. Next item.
TR 22-34 is resolution amending special exceptions SC 03-0136 and SC 03-0137 for 513 West Broad Street, the Byron, and as amended through Resolution 2011-25 to allow for additional permitted service and office uses for the first floor commercial spaces currently restricted under the voluntary concessions, community benefits, terms and conditions, VCs.
All right, thank you. Welcome.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Good evening, Mayor Tyrett and members of council. My name is Jack Trainer. I'm a staff planner. And tonight I'll be presenting an application amending the special exception agreement of 513 West Broad Street, also known as the Byron. Tonight, council is requested to discuss and consider referral to the Planning Commission and Economic Development Authority of an application for special exception amendment to the related voluntary concessions, community benefits, terms and conditions for the Byron mixed-use building located at 513 West Broad Street. The Byron is on a site of about 1.94 acres. It holds 90 residential condos, approximately 18,422 square feet of commercial, about half of which is on the first floor of the building and is the subject of the application. The property is zoned B1 limited business and sits within the West Broad Street Planning Opportunity Area. These VCs have been amended previously in 2003 and 2007 and 11. And tonight, generally, the summary of requested changes are relaxation of the use restrictions to provide more flexibility on the westernmost ground floor spaces, which are closest to Howard E. Herman, Stream Valley Park, excuse me, and incorporate a parking management plan to clarify which spaces are available for commercial uses. And there are about 6 amendments to the original VCs in this latest application that I want to highlight in a little more detail quickly. The first is an amendment to condition 7, which amendment would limit the permitted uses in units 130, which is Harvey's Restaurant, and 110A, Penzi's Spices, to retail sales and restaurant uses. The same amendment would also allow permitted uses in units 110B, which is currently vacant, and 110C, Acton Academy, to be limited to all by right uses allowed in the B1 limited business district, except for those listed in the applicant's proposed revisions to approve voluntary concessions dated November 3rd, 2022. The second amendment is amendment to condition 8, which would requires submission of a parking management plan as part of the special exception application and requires any future revisions to the PMP be subject to review and approval by the planning director. The third is an addition of a new condition, which is requiring the maintenance of 2 existing short-term 15-minute parking spaces in the courtyard area for the life of the project, and another new condition which would guarantee the existing bicycle rack, which has a storage capacity of about 7 bicycles, to be maintained on the property for the life of the project as well. An amendment to condition 12 would require all ground floor commercial units to have an entrance along West Broad Street to assist with streetscape activation and define storefront transparency as offering a view into an area of which commercial space where human activity normally occurs and does not include views into areas blocked by display cases, the rear of shelving, interior walls, blinds, hallways, or the like. And lastly, one last new condition would require the applicant to negotiate in good faith with all future commercial tenant leases to encourage the installation of energy-efficient lighting and water-efficient plumbing utilities within their respective first-floor commercial units. Staff has reviewed this latest submission and just want to highlight a couple key points for consideration. The first is the applicant's commitment to commercial uses. Just want to underscore that an amendment to VC7 would limit the Penzi Spices and Harvey's Restaurant units to retail sales and restaurants uses. And the remaining 2 spaces would match what has been used recently in approved mixed-use projects such as Founders Row 2. The second is clear and complete parking management plan. As stated earlier, the applicant would be required to submit a parking management plan and has done so already. This is under review by staff and is being reviewed for consistency with previously approved project PMPs. The final PMP would be subject to the approval of the Byron Condo Association and the Director of Planning. Staff's also reviewed the available on-site bicycle parking and found the number of 7 to be consistent with current code requirements. The next point staff wants to highlight is urban design considerations. The applicant has offered to maintain the pedestrian ingress and egress of the commercial spaces, all 4 onto West Broad Street. This is a common concession in more recently approved projects, but is not currently committed under the Byron's agreement. Staff recommends that the applicant revise the offered commitment to retail transparency to include a square footage and percentage minimum to have some sort of quantifiable unit other than negotiating in good faith. Or sorry, that's the next one. But similarly, the staff recommends that the applicant include language in the environmental sustainability proposed amendment describing how the presented environmental concessions would be monitored and reported in their good faith dealings with new tenants. So lastly, before I hand it over to Mr. Andrew Painter, who's here on behalf of the applicant to give a presentation, I want to go through a couple last points on staff's recommendation, which is to adopt the proposed motion and summarize a couple key elements for consideration. The first is certainty of a parking management plan and dedicated parking spaces for retail and other commercial uses in the site, which has been a highlighted source that I know council has pointed to the last time that this came before you in August. The next is certainty of commercial anchors paired with flexibility for other spaces to respond to market changes, which should limit long-term vacancies. And lastly, consistency with recent approvals for mixed-use buildings, which also include a mix of committed commercial anchors and flexible uses in the remaining spaces. And before I hand it over to Mr. Painter, I also want to direct council's attention to a couple late changes in the resolution that staff was made aware of later in the day today. There, if we could go to line, let me pull it up for you, Sophie. These changes were included in the last resolution and have just been replaced by the new submission, which the first is on line 473. Which strikes some more explicit commercial and office parking. This would be replaced in the parking management plan, again, which would have to be approved by the planning director and the Byron Condo Association for any approvals to take effect. And the second one is on line 508, striking formerly condition 11 of retail service. Uses being limited to 40% of the primary street frontage, which the applicant is also addressing through commitment of keeping the Penzies and Harveys units as those uses. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mr. Painter for his presentation.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Painter? Not sure your mic's on.
I got it right here. Yeah, it turned on. Thank you very much. My name is Andrew Painter. I'm a zoning attorney at the law firm of Walsh Colucci, speaking tonight on behalf of the Byron at Falls Church LLC. It is the owner of the 4 ground floor commercial spaces at the Byron. Craig Cheney, who is with KLMB, is the broker responsible for the leasing at the Byron. The changes before you represent several months of work. My sincere appreciation to our project planner, Jack Trainer, as well as Gary Fuller in getting us to this point this evening. And given the relatively narrow nature of the request, we are requesting the ability to go on to the Planning Commission and to the EDA to solicit their feedback. We've worked very hard with staff to get to this point, and again, appreciate it. If we can go to the next slide. I'm going to be fairly brief in a lot of this. The Byron was among the city's first mixed-use redevelopments when it was approved back in 2003. And at the time of the approval, council sought to limit the uses at the ground level to just retail sales and restaurant uses almost exclusively. And the goal really was to limit those uses to those traditional uses. But I think with the benefit of hindsight going on 20 years from now, if you think back to where you were 20 years ago, where we are today, the same thing is true as far as the changes in the retail and restaurant scene as well. And despite a very low vacancy rate citywide, the 2 spaces at the very end, against, adjacent to Howard Herman Park and the next one in, those 2 end spaces, they're the least visible. They've proven the toughest to lease. And with my jogging route, which goes across West Broad every morning, I've seen it. I've seen the brown paper up in the windows. It's not very inviting from an economic development perspective or welcoming environment into the city. We can go to, and actually stay right here. I think a couple council members were not here the last time that we appeared before you. The Harvey space opened up in March of 2022 after 16 months being vacant. The end space against Howard or adjacent to Howard Herman Park after 19 months vacant, Acton Academy opened up this year. And then after about almost 4 years at this point being vacant, Diva Nail Salon is one of the pending leases. And when we filed this application, we were looking at all 4 spaces, and the idea was to allow both, really to allow retail service uses and office uses in all 4 units. After talking with staff, sort of ratcheting back the request, and having that firm commitment to restaurant and retail uses, not to do anything related to the Harvey space or the Penzi spaces, we reduced the request substantially to the upper 2 spaces, just again, the ones that are the toughest. And that really is what this comes down to. It's just allowing retail service uses in those 2 spaces. If we can go to the next slide. So a couple of the leasing issues that we have discovered after going through sort of everything here. There's underutilized and underperforming spaces. It doesn't benefit anyone to have them vacant. Certainly broadening the uses for those 2 end cap spaces would benefit the owner, but it also benefits the city. Because if Acton goes away or, heaven forbid, another user comes in and they go away, we don't want to have to spend months going through the special exception process, eating up staff and council time evaluating it. What what the proposal seeks to do is to bring consistency to the uses here, to provide a solid mix of uses that you would see in other similarly situated mixed-use developments. There are overly strict prohibitions on retail service and office uses. There is a restriction of no more than 40% for retail services. So, for example, say Acton Academy or another education provider wanted to extend into the space that is currently leased, pending action by council to the nail salon, they couldn't do it absent council approval. We also found that there's a need to address the parking issues between the residential and retail and office tenants. We heard this anecdotally from a former tenant who is no longer on the project, and so we use this as an invitation to speak with the Byron Condominium Association, and we have presented a parking management plan that is included in your staff report this evening as well. And last but not least, the second to last bullet point, there is a 5-year restriction on office tenant leases. There is the ability to get an additional 5-year extension from staff, but when you have a credit-worthy tenant that's seeking to make a major investment in space, it's difficult to persuade them that that is going to be a given when they're looking to locate here. If we can go to the next slide. We can skip this one as well. So the long-term goals that we've identified at least are, number one, to really unleash the commercial leasing potential by building in flexibility to effectively market these two spaces to a broader array of tenants. The time to act is now, even though we have leased one of the two spaces in question, because we don't want to find ourselves again in the same position that we have been in for, a couple of years. Also, the ability to more quickly respond to opportunities, identify commercial tenants which will generate street level activity and serve the immediate community, and frankly, generate patrons that will walk by Harvey's and Penzeys on a day-to-day basis. Generate a positive business image along West Broad Street. As I mentioned, bringing consistency in the permitted uses, and as I also mentioned, saving time for staff not to have to review special exception after special exception as they come up. We can go to the next slide. We talked about the various proposed changes staff did. The first proposed changes, as he mentioned, this is the most important one. It does expand the list of uses to reflect the B1 use list, but it also adds substantially to the prohibited uses that the City Council now expects. And staff actually provided the list of prohibited uses from Founders Row and Founders Row 2, and we have incorporated those uses. So things like vape stores, gun stores, mortuaries, flea markets, auto repair stores, those types of things are now prohibited explicitly. So it's not just a blanket, whatever you want to do in B1. There are severe restrictions on it, and those will continue. If we can go to the next slide. The parking management plan, adding this as a condition of approval, we can go to the next slide. There's a series of things that it does. There's a couple of maps associated with it, but the bullet points that are on the screen are the things that are incorporated into this parking management plan. Color coding, stenciling, signage, requiring courtyard spaces to be 2 hours except for 2 15-minute spaces, maintaining signage at the property entrance, alerting patrons to towing, installing signage alerting patrons to the availability of parking for retail and commercial uses in the parking garage itself. Including a lease requirement that all employees park on the second and third levels of the parking garage, and more. If we can go to the next slide. Another change, as staff mentioned, requires 2 15-minute parking spaces in the courtyard area. We can go to the next slide. Maintenance of an existing bicycle parking rack. That is there today. It is a site plan condition. Staff had actually asked us to include a commitment to bicycle parking. We then informed staff that we do have a bicycle parking rack, but we'll be happy to maintain it. And now that it is already a site plan condition, staff has actually asked us to not include this, but we're happy to include it if council would like. If we can go to the next slide. Requiring the owner to encourage within all of its lease and future tenants the installation of energy-efficient lighting and water-efficient plumbing fixtures. We've talked with staff. They either are working on or have a talking piece that we can provide to our tenants, and we can report compliance with that following negotiation of leases. Next slide. And then the last change is simply updating the resolution numbers. So we can go to the final slide. Really, what this comes down to again for us is opening opportunities for the owner to provide, to market these two spaces to a broader array of tenants, but also economic development for the city, so that these spaces are not left vacant in the event that one of the tenants happens to leave. And again, it's not all 4 spaces. It's only the 2 end cap spaces closest to Howard Herman Park, which again are the least visible and have proven the toughest to lease. So I'm not sure if you want to say anything, Craig, but.
No, you covered it well.
Okay. But we're happy to answer any questions that you may have. And just to also reiterate, Mr. Lee is here as well, the property owner. So thank you very much for your time and work on this, but happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you so much. Let's go ahead and open it up to questions and comments from council. We have questions, comments for folks? Ms. Hardy?
Thank you. I guess I get to go first. So thank you, Mr. Painter, and thank you, Mr. Trainer, for the staff report. So in general, I think this came to the EDC probably over a year ago. And so through the course of those conversations, I think you heard it generally support the idea of being realistic about the market, right? I think for something like the Byron that was built nearly 20 years ago at this point, we clearly have to respond to some market changes. I think it's unrealistic to think that, the retail that we had requested in the VCs back then to be the same use as now. So that's kind of what I'll say to kind of preface all of this. And I totally get the leasing challenges and appreciate all the efforts of how long it took to get kind of both Harvey's and Acton. And I think in the case of both of them, that's actually a success story. I mean, Penzies is now one of the beloved new restaurants. It's, winning awards from the news press. And Acton, I think, is a terrific, Harvey's, sorry, I meant Harvey's. And Acton now, I think, is a great use for that space, especially now in the partnership we see with Howard Herman Park, and it's not very parking intensive. So both of those, I think, actually are success stories. My question is, though, given that we did ratchet down from kind of the 4 spaces that you originally sought relaxation of the SE requirements to now the 2 spaces, is now that Acton's actually filled, help me understand why you wouldn't just seek it for the remaining space that's been vacant.
I think it comes down to predictability and flexibility in the marketplace. If something, forbid, were to happen to Acton, another COVID outbreak, or they go belly up, or whatever it happens to be, I don't think the city wants to be in a position where it's waiting another 18 months or another 6 months to have, to try to fill that space. It's already proven that the existing retail restrictions and the restaurant restrictions here are very restrictive. And they're also not experienced by other mixed-use redevelopment projects of similar size and scope in the city. So I just don't understand why there would be a restriction. If the use is not obnoxious, if it's not offensive, if it's a use that's already been acceptable, if it's uses that have already been acceptable and deemed acceptable by council in approving other mixed-use special exceptions, I'm not sure why we'd want to limit the flexibility for an owner to bring in a new user. Also, Acton and Harvey's and Penzies, they all have signed leases, which means they all have signed rights. And merely introducing additional flexibility is not all of a sudden going to make the owner say, oh, that's a far better use, I can get more rent, I'm going to try to kick out a tenant. I think Mr. Lee and any owner is very happy to have any tenants in this space right now, and they'd be lucky to keep them.
So talk to me about the parking. So I know that you guys have spent a lot of time thinking about the parking management plan. I think we've heard anecdotally, and we've probably experienced it ourselves when we try to use that parking deck, that between the retail and the residential space now interspersed, parking can be a challenge. If we could put up one of the slides, I think it might be either in the staff report that shows.
It's at the end of I think it's the very next slide, Sophia.
Kind of how the 3 decks are laid out. I think the public and the rest of council probably get a better appreciation of. Essentially, the ground floor has got a mix of commercial parking and residential parking interspersed, and then the second floor is the same, and then third floor, I think, is all commercial, correct?
That's correct. So what's reflected here, all the way to the left, is the sort of the entrance level of the garage. Those spaces that are in blue are spaces that were conveyed by the original builder to residents. The spaces in purple or yellow are spaces reserved for commercial. Those in purple are for the office uses in the property. Those spaces that are yellow on both the first and second level are limited to 2 hours and therefore commercial uses. And then the spaces that are on the top level are commercial, limited to 3 hours. And that is where employees are encouraged to park.
And so one of the leasing challenges is the fact that the parking is the way it is. Is that what you've heard as well, or what are the?
We heard that anecdotally from one tenant who is no longer on the property. Craig, I don't know, or Simon, if you've heard anything, but we have not heard that from any of the current tenants on the property.
No, we haven't.
Okay. So also walk me through kind of any historical efforts on trying to rectify the parking. So obviously, it's not ideal to have your parking mixed together like that because it obviously confuses people and people worry about getting towed or parking in the wrong places. Talk to me about what's been done to date.
Well, we have had discussions with representatives of the association, and actually the president of the Byron Condominium Association, Kathleen Tai, is actually here this evening. And I'm sure she'd be able to, field questions about that if you'd like to recognize her.
Sure. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm Kathy Tai. I'm president of the Byron Condo Association. I came to support the application for the special exemption amendments, and I'm happy we manage the parking at the Byron. And I'm happy to obviously answer any questions. I realize what causes most concern is the residents who have spaces within the commercial parking garage. Unfortunately, that's a problem I don't think we can do anything about because the builder deeded, these were sold to those resident owners. There was discussion last year with Mr. Lee and his representatives trying to brainstorm ideas on what we could do about that. I believe those owners were approached. This was before I was the condo president, so it's sort of my understanding. I'll caveat that. But they were approached with some idea to, would you move your space, up a level? And I think that was met with very limited success. So the owners were approached. They, by and large, have wanted to stay where they are. And so that leaves us with the garage. I'll just say this, though, about the parking problems at the Byron. Obviously, I think previous commercial tenants have complained about parking. I know at the time when the previous restaurant was there and the yoga studio that there were times during the day when parking was a problem. We have not seen that in the last few years. Some of that is the pandemic. Some of that is AWCI, which is a large commercial owner on site, doing a lot of teleworking. So not as many people, employees are parking in the spaces. But for whatever reason, I mean, my condo overlooks the parking, the courtyard parking. I'm on the second floor. I have a pretty good idea, and I'm home all day. I have a pretty good idea what it looks like at various points during the day. And there are times when the courtyard gets busy, and there are times when the parts of the garage get busy, but there's never a time when it's all busy. There isn't. And so I think that we have some flexibility there in the parking, and we really are trying to work with Mr. Lee and the other commercial owners because we would like to improve signage. We would like to make this, right now we're not really currently enforcing parking restrictions because I believe our signs aren't very good. And I want to get to the point where the restrictions are visible to everyone and we have a fair ability to do enforcement of that the parking restrictions. But we solicited input from all the commercial owners or users a couple months ago, and I think various people have problems with various parts of the parking. Penzies really likes those two 15-minute spaces, and they get upset when people are there longer than that. But with those pockets of sort of problems and understanding the new tenant will bring new parking, I think we can work, we're able to work with most of those issues. So, thank you.
Thank you. That's it for now.
Mr. Duncan?
Thank you. Thank you all for coming tonight and sharing your thoughts on this again. Thanks to the landlord for coming tonight. And thanks to Miss Kathleen, for your perspective on the history of the situation. The original sin we're all trying to deal with here is, in my opinion, the fact that the parking spaces most accessible for commercial use were a significant number of them deeded over to property owners, many years ago. I wasn't on council then, of course. Mr. Snyder might remember, but I was involved in the community, and I can assure you that it never occurred to any of us that we were providing a certain amount of parking for this new condo building, and it never occurred to any of us to say, oh, and by the way, some of you folks who live there, don't go buying a third or a fourth space or whatever. It just, we should have seen it, I guess. Same thing happened at the Broadway, where multiple spaces were bought by condo owners, and they have some parking problems there too that we are always looking for leverage to try to deal with, and that's where I'm going with this comment. The building at one level is extremely, I know it's hard to predict the future 20 years ago, but at some level, and you all have heard me say this, it's the most successful mixed-use building we have in town. It's got a local chef-driven restaurant. It's got a national credit tenant in Penzies. It's got a very loyal following. It's got Acton Academy now, which is an educational use, very suitable, not so much traffic. The office spaces back behind the exercise outfit. You know, it's a bit of a, if it ain't broke, you know, why would I fix it dilemma that I think we find ourselves in here. The only way that I can justify, I think, trying to fix it, if it needs fixing, is to use this as an opportunity to really try to solve the parking problem to the degree that we can. And to me, what I see right here is a good start, but I agree with Kathleen in her remarks that the signs are a mess. It's just hard to understand, even though I've been there dozens of times over the years. You know, these yellow means like don't go there. You know, why doesn't green mean commercial parking? 2 hours at one level, 3 hours at the other level. Is 3 hours parking really enough for an employee to work a whole shift? Maybe some employees, but not really. Anyway, I just feel like in looking at these documents, particularly as they relate to parking management, that I don't want to miss the opportunity to try to resolve these things. And I personally would feel, you know, I'm highly confident in the competence of our staff, Mr. Trainer, Mr. Snyder, and the whole operation, but I understand the value of leverage. I'm trying to channel my best Dave Snyder here. You know, negotiating with property owners, you know, it's a process that is not adversarial, but it is, you know, it's a process that needs to have some bounds to it. And I personally would feel more comfortable if some of the parking issues that I've raised, and maybe others have personal experience there also, could be addressed before we get to the point of referring it out to the Planning Commission, because I'd like to try to give them as good a product as possible before we put it in their lap, so that they don't have to basically do some of the work that should have been done 15 years ago, frankly. I don't know, that's just those are my sort of opening thoughts.
Other comments? Ms. Conley?
On the parking management plan, this is the new plan. How is this different from the current plan?
Councilwoman Connolly, there is no current plan right now. There's no plan.
There's no plan at all?
There's no
But
plan.
you have the reserve, the residential spaces
Yeah,
have already been allocated and everything
Correct.
else is,
that's
So
right.
it's signage for the allocation, I
That's
think
right.
is what they're talking about. Not reallocating spaces, they're just signing them better.
Right. Yeah, some of the spaces were allocated, or some of the spaces were sold by the builder
Right.
to the residents, and the rest were just signed for commercial uses. So what this is going to do is provide additional stenciling, paint, making very clear where the spaces are, alert patrons to the availability of parking in the garage, you know, insert additional towing signage and that sort of thing.
is there a lower level of parking?
There is, and that's all
That's residential
parking.
only?
Residential only.
Okay, so there's more than just these residential spots?
Correct. There's an entire level below that's just residential, and it's gated as well.
Okay. Then the 3-hour parking doesn't exist right now either.
The 3-hour parking does exist. That's what the signage is, but it has not been
Okay.
enforced.
Yeah, the 3-hour parking does exist for the top floor. The reason, I think a question was asked about employees get a sticker on their car, and so they actually can park more than 3 hours. So if you have a sticker on your car, you get to park all day during your workday. But we have, and I don't know at what point the top level was changed to 3 hours, but I believe it might be a change. But it was, and I don't know the intention. I think that the difference really between what's existing right now and what we hope to do with the parking management plan is the stenciling. We were hoping to color code commercial versus private. We want to make better notice to people of the hours limitations, because we do get people who park there longer than 2 hours and longer than 3 hours when they should not, and longer than 15 minutes when they should not. And so the stenciling, we really need to do restriping in that courtyard. We need to do it in the garage, although there's some complications with that because we're going to be doing a garage project at some point in the next year. So we have to talk about the timing of that. But we want to do better signs that are more visible. I do not think you can see the 2 hours or the 3 hours or the 15 minutes very easily when you park in those lots. So I think what we hope to do that's different is better signage, better clarity as to what's commercial and what's private.
And I think just, if I may, just picking up on Councilman Duncan's comments, I think there will continue to be additional revisions. The project will continue to evolve. We've been at this for several months. We have a pending lease that's also been waiting. And if you look at the schedule that staff has outlined, we're not scheduled to come back before staff until February of 2023. So that's 4 months from now. We are just asking the ability to go to the Planning Commission and the EDA and incorporate their feedback before coming back. But there will be plenty of time for us to revise things. And again, we've been at this for several months with staff. We've made all sorts of adjustments at staff's request as well. And so this is, it's kind of holding up moving forward with any lease efforts, be it the nail salon or a potential other user as well.
Other comments? I mean, to me, do other folks have comments? Otherwise, I'll just wait. The essence of part of the problem is parking, clearly, and it goes beyond, in my opinion, just the signage of it. It's just this muddle of a ground floor parking plan, right? You got residential spots in some places, a mix. People don't really know what's expected of them. In my own experience, I think people just don't really know where they can park here. I think this project would be much more successful if you had the ground floor be commercial, like it is in a lot of other projects all over the place, and not this hodgepodge muddle that it is that unfortunately gets started by the developer. I mean, is the way out of this merely to sign? I don't know. I mean, a much better solution to my mind would be not just offering people, hey, you want to go up 3 floors to get your parking space, but here's 20 grand to do it too. And I don't know whether that's occurred or whether it's just been, look, that's the nature of this thing. Nobody wants to spend any money, but at the end of the day, you want to lease up your property, and that creates value of the owner, I presume. It doesn't create any value leasing up the property?
Craig?
It's just cost prohibitive to do that. I mean,
well, I mean, it may be cost prohibitive to have your property sit vacant for 18 months also.
I guess if this was a big-time developer, I could understand that request, but this is not a big-time developer that has that kind of deep pockets to spend that kind of money. It's just, it would be, if that was the request, it just wouldn't happen. It just wouldn't.
Well, I mean, look, I don't know the answer to this. I don't know the economics. I know sitting vacant for 18 months is probably a big loss of income as well. So to my mind, the solution to this is to try to work out parking that works for your tenants. I don't think it works right now for your tenants. I mean, that's what I understand, and looking at it, that's what I would think as well, is that this hodgepodge mess on the ground floor isn't intuitive to tenants, to clients, other people, customers, and the like. So, I mean, to me, that's one of the issues, and not just offering somebody, hey, you want to go up 3 flights of stairs to get your parking spot, I'll do you an even trade. I don't think anybody's going to take you up on that. Did anyone take you up on that offer?
I mean, it's a bigger issue than that. I mean,
I'm questioning whether those who park there are really whether we have a parking problem. I mean, I can look in that chart, and I agree with you that it is hodgepodgey, and if I had to wave a magic wand over it, I would certainly fix the problem of the residents who park on the first floor of the parking garage. But I don't think any of us have that magic wand, and they were approached and they refused to move.
But they just
and
sold-
then money was offered. Money was offered. It was not like, hey, would you do this because you're a nice guy? Money was offered, is my understanding. So I think, but I don't think there's been that many complaints about parking. And so I look at the courtyard many times during the day, and it's got a lot of spaces open, and that's the premier courtyard parking. And when you go around the garage, you see a lot of vacant spaces. And so I'm just, how much would you ask? And I don't want to speak for Mr. Lee and everybody, but how much would you ask them to pay to solve a problem that doesn't exist? Just because the map would look better.
Well, again, I don't know where the problem, intuitively to me, it looks to me like you got a parking problem. Having been around here for a pretty good while, I think anecdotally people would say you got a parking problem. You may say there's no parking problem at all, and I don't know who.
I'm not saying it all, but I'm saying that it's certain times a day in certain parts of the parking facility. That garage is never full, never. And so I think that's the problem. And so I don't know what the answer is, but I think if you're going to say that we have to solve the problem of the residents who own spaces on the first floor before anything else can proceed, I've got a lot of things kind of on hold. I mean, we had an agreement last February for the new signage and everything, and it's been on hold. I want to restripe the courtyard, and I want to do some things. I've got to fix the handicap spaces, and I'm kind of waiting for all of that. There's some things we need to do, and anyway, I don't see that the problem is that we can solve the problem immediately of those residents who own those spaces. So, and I'm sorry that situation exists. It's unfortunate, but I just don't think there's an easy answer to that.
Got it. All right, I've got a couple other comments as well. One, just in general with staff, the notion of these sort of list of things that people can't do, and I know we've done this on other projects. I have to say, I don't find it that useful to prohibit mortuaries in a space like this, or prohibit car washes, or bingo halls, or blood banks, or just a lot of the stuff that's here. I don't think is that useful of an exercise. I think we'd be much all better served by a limited list of things that we can do. We can all agree we're going to keep it to these 10 buckets of things, as opposed to trying to think of every possible thing and picking out 14 weird things that probably are mostly highly unlikely and dated from 30 years ago, 50 years ago. But I just don't see, again, a lot of these things we're talking about here. I would be very surprised if, in fact, anybody wants to put a lot of this stuff in here. And so I think in general, going forward, not just on a project like this, but on all projects, I would prefer to see a list of prohibited uses. Also, with respect to the, I think it's condition, is it maybe 19 or just number 19, line 500 or so, it talks about you'll negotiate in good faith with your commercial tenants to encourage the installation of energy efficient lighting. As a landlord, can't you just require that? You don't have to encourage it. Can't you just require that as part of your leases, that everyone has to use that?
You can, but the more you costs you put on a tenant, when you're competing with other projects, it makes it more challenging. So
it may. I mean, I think vacant space is probably a pretty good big challenge too. I mean, 18 months of vacant space.
Well, those kinds of things are what cause the vacant space. Those kinds
requiring environmentally friendly lighting is what's causing that.
That's not an existing condition right now. So that's not the reason why it's vacant right now. It's these other conditions that have been causing the vacancy. But the more conditions you put on a tenant, the less desirable it becomes, because tenants can go anywhere in the metropolitan area if they want to.
Well, I mean, again, you're talking about right now a space that has restrictions that you can't use. You're coming in here asking us to remove those conditions. And what you're saying here is you won't commit to even have it environmentally friendly lighting.
I'm not saying that that's Mr. Lee's decision to make. I'm just telling you, I'm just a leasing guy. And so I've been leasing space for 22 years. I'm just telling you from my experience after 22 years of leasing that the more conditions you put on tenants, the more difficult you make it to lease space. That's just my experience after 22 years. That's all I can speak to.
All right. Thank you.
I ask
Yes.
a further question. Thank you for sharing your perspective. It's helpful, I think, for everybody to sort of lay their cards on the table. Everybody's been very constructively, candidly, informative, at least from where I sit. I wanted to ask Ms. Ty, is there anything that this council is doing or not doing that would prevent you from going ahead with the map that's shown here? I mean, is there any reason that you could not go ahead and make these improvements in a parking situation that you think is, okay, but would be better apparently, because otherwise you wouldn't be suggesting the improvements?
I understood that this process needed to be completed before we could put new signage up. I mean, I sort of wondered why, because I'm not changing the hours on the signs. I'm just changing the verbiage. And we had already worked with the towing company to talk about maybe using some more towing signs and reducing the towing verbiage on the sign itself, because there's so many words on them that stuff gets lost.
Appreciate you.
I would love, but I was told this process needed to be completed. So if we are able, and the council has no problem with us going forward with essentially the parking management plan as currently written, I would like to bring that through the board.
Okay, well,
first,
I don't-
right? I would like to do that. The board had already approved essentially the essential elements of that plan last February. But because of all the discussions and a couple little changes in the parking management plan, I would like to bring it before the board again, which would probably happen at the beginning of January. At that point, I would love to go through and do some restriping and additional signage.
Okay, well, I'm looking at our city attorney here. I don't want to give up any leverage or do anything improper, or suggest that anything improper be done, obviously, but I guess I'd be curious to hear my colleagues' thoughts about, I mean, it seems to me we got a parking problem of some nature. I agree with everything that you've said, appreciate your sensitivity to those of us who don't see so well and can't make out the tiny little print on those damn signs. I'd love to get that problem addressed, and I understand the landlord's perspective. They're not, to me at least, they're not necessarily intricately connected. I mean, we could do one and consider the other later from where I sit, unless I'm suggesting something that's improper. I don't want to get in the middle of a landlord, tenant, owner, condo, so, a lot of lawyers involved here.
That was a comment I was going to make, but I think your comments are well taken, but I think they'll take it into consideration as they move forward. But the process needs to move forward the way it's going forward.
And just to provide some clarity on this, if I may, the parking management issues, we've been very responsive to staff. Every request that's been asked, we've responded to, and that's what's formulated the parking management plan. The question that was before us was whether or not we could do this without a site plan amendment. And after some discussion, since we were going through the SCA process, it was determined that we could come up with a parking management plan that could be administratively approved by the planning director, assuming council approves it as part of the special exception amendment. So that, I think, is the reason why we've all been under the impression that the two had to move forward together. But if that's different, then you can move forward as you need.
Mr. Snyder?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, first of all, I want to thank everyone for coming out here tonight. I mean, we've spent more time on this project than we have like Founders Row 2 that really needed this kind of work. So I think we've all said we'd like a better parking management plan. I understand they're going to work on it. Both sides have said they're going to work on it. And I don't want to delay the possibility of the commercial sites being occupied by taxpaying commercial tenants. So I'm in favor of moving forward on this tonight. I'll make that motion if we're ready to go that far.
Ms. Connolly, do you have something else, or you?
No, I was going to move as well, but Mr. Snyder can do that.
All right, anyone else have anything to say?
I have a request for staff. Mr. Trainer, so hodgepodge aside, have we done a count of how many spaces there are for commercial versus residential? So I understand from the residents of the Byron that you don't currently experience a very severe parking issue, but anecdotally, I think we've all heard otherwise, and we've experienced it ourselves. And I think partially it's due to COVID, as you said, that people are working from home. Partially there are different uses there. There's not a yoga studio there, nor it's probably less intensive use given that we have Acton. So if we modeled out the most intensive uses as predicted, based on relaxing these, based on the parking counts that are in the 3 stories of the garage, how does that look compared to what those uses might be? Because I worry, again, that one of the unintended consequences could be that we relax the uses and then actually create the parking issue we already had several years ago. Even with the better color coding and whatnot, you still end up having parking issues.
Yeah, I don't know that staff has gamed that out yet for every potential use that could come into those vacant properties. I think we have. There was a site plan, so we have some idea of what the approved number of spaces are, on site. But as far as what the I couldn't speak specifically to what, maybe what you're asking, what the parking requirements might be for like certain commercial uses.
The most intensive of the ones that we
Right,
would be
yeah.
relaxing and
That might
allowing.
be more of a zoning question, but I could check, with our zoning folks and get back to you.
That feels
certainly.
like an important one, because I think we're talking about two potentially different issues, right? One is the hodgepodge and the lack of kind of having a block of easy access space for commercial. The other might be just not having enough kind of on that ground floor, which is what people prefer.
Yeah, and I think staff would make those, checks when we got a parking management plan, which, the applicant has submitted that, and we're in the process, I think, of doing those kind of approvals now. Part of the application would be, the approval of a parking management plan eventually. Any approvals that are made from this body would, be subject to an approved parking management plan after those kind of considerations are met from staff. So, as far as checking those, I think details we're still in the process of doing because we received the parking management plan a couple weeks ago.
Okay. So that would be a request I would have, because it feels important that we'd actually make sure that we have the right number of spaces as well for the uses that are being asked for.
So let me ask the applicant's attorney. So you've heard a lot of comments tonight. If we were to go ahead and approve it to allow it, at least go forward, would you all be considering these issues and coming back to us potentially with some changes based on what you heard tonight?
Absolutely. Yeah, the answer is yes.
Okay. All right. Do we have a motion?
I'll move to refer TR 22-34 to the Planning Commission and Economic Development Authority for review and recommendations to the City Council.
Friendly amendment to that motion. I would like specifically for the Planning Commission and EDA to consider relaxing it only for the 110B space and not the 110C space. Is that one of the options for them to consider? Does that sound reasonable?
Well, I don't.
So it says consider options, and I just want to be more clear in the motion that that's what I would like to hear feedback from. Because right now they're asking for both 110C, which is Acton, and 110B, which is the vacant space. I'd like to know whether they would recommend only for the vacant space, because Acton is actually already filled.
As long as they look at both at the same time, it just seems that a lease is something that expires, and then do we have to do this again in 5 years? Does it make sense to keep them together? So I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other, but I would like to have them look at both of them as well.
Yes, so just be more explicit, I want to look at both options. So considering the amendment for both 110C and 110B, or only one and not the other, as part of the recommendations.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a recommendation.
The motion says look at options, right, and give us a recommendation. For review and recommendation, I guess. I guess we figure out the better wording for that.
No, then I am not going to accept that friendly amendment. If they choose to do that, they can do that, but I don't want to request that as part of the motion.
All right, so we have a motion and a second.
Who was the
Any member of the public wish to speak to this matter?
I second.
Seeing none, the matter is closed to the public. We have a motion and a second.
We did not have a second.
Dave Snyder just seconded it. All right, any further comment before we take a vote? All right, Madam Clerk?
Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
No.
Ms. Hardy?
No.
Ms. Sean Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
The motion carries.
Again, I'd spent some time listening to what you heard and trying to work on that, including what Ms. Hardy said as well. Thank you. Let's go ahead and take a 5-minute recess. It's 9:47. Let's go to 9:52. All right, it's time to get back at it. Maybe we can accelerate the pace of the rest of our meeting. And okay, we're aiming for it. That's what I heard. Good job. Let's do it. So I've had a request to switch two items or one item, which is move the retirement board, a pension plan item up one little item here. So unless anyone objects, I'm going to go ahead and grant that request, and we'll go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Messner to tell us about our retirement plan very briefly.
Great, thank you, Mayor and Council, and I appreciate the order switch. I do have with me the Chair of the Retirement Board, Connie Ryberg, right here behind me, if there's any questions. So the item before you is TO 22-19 ordinance, and this would be an amendment to the city code as it relates to the section on personnel pension plans, and it would add to the responsibility of the retirement board oversight of the defined contributions retirement savings plan, that which we fondly refer to as 457B and 401A, the IRS code section. For private sector, most people would be familiar with that as a 401B. The defined contributions are something the city has offered as a benefit, but it hasn't been under the oversight of a fiduciary body, and good practice would have that under a committee such as a retirement board. So for efficiency, it is the staff's recommendation that the city code ordinance be amended to include this duty under the retirement board. The retirement board did undertake a due diligence of this process for about a year, and then in September at their meeting made a recommendation to request city council to amend the city code to give the ordinance authority to them. This is similar to 2013 and 14 when the OPEB oversight was added to the retirement board. The staff report, starting at line 152, covers the code changes in blue with some minor strikeouts in red, and it basically is just adding the defined contribution retirement savings plan, and it has been reviewed by the city attorney. And with that, I'm glad to answer any questions. Ann is the chair, and she's here to represent the endorsement of the retirement board.
All right, well, thank you for that brief presentation, brief but potent and powerful and very informative. Mr. Snyder?
Thanks very much. The first thing I want to do is recognize the chairperson of the board who has put in literally, I don't know how many, hundreds, thousands of hours applying her expertise for the benefit of the city and our citizens. So I think we all owe you a huge debt of gratitude. So
Absolutely.
I just didn't want this moment to pass without that. Thank you so much. Just a quick question. Is the retirement board comfortable doing it? Because it's a pretty significant responsibility. And do you have the support and resources you need to get the job done?
Yes. So we did take, as Ms. Mister said, quite a in-depth review of the responsibilities. We brought in several experts to educate us. I have some expertise in the area as well. So after a lot of discussion, consideration of our fiduciary responsibility, making sure that we had the support of the city, we had the right consultants and experts behind us supporting us, the retirement board got comfortable that we could dutifully and faithfully take on this responsibility.
And do you have the capability to ask for additional resources if you need them?
We do.
Okay. And city staff, I assume, would be very receptive to that if the retirement board asked them. Is that right, Deputy Manager?
Yes, definitely very responsive as being the pension plan administrator by city code.
Okay. Thanks very much.
All right, any other questions, comments? Any public comment? Seeing none, the matter is closed to the public. Do we have a motion?
Move to grant first reading to TO 22-19, schedule second reading and final consideration for November 28th, 2022, and advertise the same according to law.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
Second, Mr. Snyder. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you, council.
Thank you. Thank you both. Much appreciated. All right, our next item. Let's move on to that.
TO 22-18 is an ordinance to amend ordinance 2024 and 2020, ordinances 2024 and 2045 regarding the budget of expenditures and revenues, appropriating funds for fiscal year 2023 for the general fund, school operating fund, and the capital improvement programs fund.
All right, and before you get started, there is a disclosure or a statement to be made, I believe. Ms. Connolly? Do you want mine?
I make the following statement before City Council's discussion of TO 22-18 relating to the FY23 budget. I am an employee of the Falls Church City School Board and a member of a group of 3 or more persons who may be affected by these matters. I can participate in them fairly, objectively, and in the public interest.
All right, I have a similar statement to read. I make the following statement before City Council's consideration of TO 22-18 relating to the FY 2023 budget. My wife's an employee of the Falls Church City School Board, and therefore I'm a member of a group of 3 or more persons who may be affected by these matters. I can participate in them fairly, objectively, in the public interest. All right, Ms. Bawa, let's turn it over to you.
Mr. Shields, did you want to make a comment?
No, let's take the mayor's cue and turn it straight over to Ms. Bawa. They heard from me at work session, so now it's Ms. Bawa's turn.
Great. Good evening, Mayor Tarter and members of the council. Today we have before you the first reading of the first budget amendment for fiscal year 2023, requesting a portion of last fiscal year's year-end funds, ARPA funds, to fund key strategic initiatives that are derived from the City Council's work session, the work plan. This staff report includes a one-page matrix on page 2, which kind of provides a summary of all the funding requests that are included in this budget amendment, along with the sources of funds that are being attributed for each request, as well as the responses to questions that council had at the work session last Monday, and those are included in Appendix A of the report. So in broad, the essence of this budget amendment is that the city will not be issuing any debt. City has not issued debt for 2 years now, with the last time being in November 2020. Also, we would have committed most of the ARPA funds with this budget amendment, and that we are transferring funds to the school to keep up the revenue share principle that was discussed last month and that has been in practice for the last few years. And as well as we'd be setting aside funds in the general fund and permit reserve for use during 2024 budget challenges. So I'll speak a little bit more to all of that in the next few slides. The funding summary on slide 2 shows that the total available funds from multiple sources total up to $7.7 million. And in this budget amendment, we are proposing to allocate $5.8 million of that. And we are proposing to hold back $1.87 million. Of that, $900,000 of that is from general fund revenue surplus, fiscal year 22. And that would be to help address potential budget challenges for fiscal year '24 as we are gearing up for that budget in the next couple of months. And we continue to monitor the impact of the evolving global economic indicators such as the rising interest rates and high inflation and supply chain disruptions and stuff, and as well as holding $973,000 in ARPA funds to account for ongoing staffing costs that are built in the use of ARPA funds through the end of fiscal year 2025. The next slide, number 3, shows the breakdown of the available sources of the request of $5.8 million that is being requested for allocation in this budget amendment. The large share, roughly $3 million, is from committing majority of the ARPA funds, the ARPA dollars. Revenue surplus of $1.6 million of the total $2.5 million that we had when we did the year-end balances. Full allocation request of full underspending of $805,000. And excess year-end permit revenue in the amount of $245,000, and finally $200,000 in bond interest income for CIP projects. This slide shows the uses in broad categories, the uses of the total allocation request of that $5.8 million, and at a high level, this includes a transfer of $1.16 million to the schools as part of the revenue shared practice, an investment of $873,000 in the city's workforce, which includes a bonus, and other initiatives, and I'll go into more details in the coming slides. $972,000 for transportation infrastructure improvements, $445,000 to meet public safety needs, $647,000 for a number of projects relating to small town character at the city, $947,000 for social sustainability, majority of which is carry forward of funds that were previously appropriated by council, $800,000 to fund CIP projects with cash in lieu of issuing debt, as was planned in the CIP. So moving along, for the school revenue share, as discussed in details last month at the Budget and Finance as well as council work sessions, so of the $3.1 million in excess local tax revenues in fiscal year 2022 year-end, $777,000 will be set aside to meet the city's general fund balance policy requirement, leaving a balance of $2.3 million, which is shared equally between the schools and general government with an equal share of $1,165,000. As part of the investment in the city's workforce, city manager is proposing a bonus of $1,000 for employees to help with escalating costs. That would require $275,000 total allocation, $100,000 for employee professional development and training, carry forward of $50,000 previously appropriated for staffing level study, $55,000 to fund a position to assist with hybrid public meetings, $165,000 to replace aging unsupported IT equipment, including the city's backup solution and public safety's virtual server environment, and $200,000 for fleet replacement program, and $28,000 for treasurer and legislative miscellaneous needs. Moving along, transportation infrastructure improvement requests include $425,000 for W&OD Trail Crossings project, for additional costs which are resulting from COVID delays and inflationary effects on material costs, and $250,000 for replacement and maintenance of traffic signals in the city.
Ms. Powell, just going to interrupt you just for a second.
Sure.
Is this essentially what we saw last week? Maybe you could just focus on the changes of what we've seen as
I
far as...
could, but since this was the first hearing, I thought maybe you wanted all
It's
of it.
fine. It's fine. Okay, go ahead.
I can make it shorter if you want.
Well, just go ahead. Yeah, just keep it going, keep the pace up. But I think we've all heard that, at least the folks in the room have all
Okay.
heard this. And the work session was also televised last week as well.
Okay. And then the remaining 150,000 for brick pavers, for maintenance of brick pavers and crosswalks, 147,000 for staff and equipment to add a 3-person rapid response crew in Public Works to address pedestrian and bike safety requests from the community. There are no changes to the public safety aspects, which is on slide 8, which includes funding for residential speed signs. That was reduction to 20 miles per hour. That was heard by council today. Next Gen 911 equipment, City Hall security, that is continuation of the contract that was initiated during the pandemic, funding of building safety administration of the building permits, and allocating the permit reserve, the remainder of it, 195,000, so no changes to that one. On this slide, number 9, there are a couple of changes, and I'll highlight those. The major portion of the small town character enhancements include the proposal to fund park improvements next to the commercial districts. And the two additions, one addition over here is the community survey, and $17,200 for initial first-year costs to perform a quality of life community survey. There has been some shift of allocation in the ARPA funds are being used for this. Net increase to the ARPA is $7,200, and that has been reflected in all the totals that have been showed on this slide. Additionally, we are proposing to fund a demographer, but no new money is being asked for it. That would be funded using $30,000 in salary savings in CPED's department and $30,000 contribution from the schools, one-time funding that they would use. So that's not included, but that's being funded. Slide 10, again, that is carry forward. The budget amendment includes carry forward of 2 requests for social sustainability, $922,000 for affordable housing acquisition strike fund, and $25,000 to facilitate rezoning of Tinner Hill commercial properties. And then finally, $800,000. The request includes $800,000 in lieu of issuing debt to fund 3 CIP projects that are previously approved by council as part of the CIP 2022-28 CIP. Includes fire station door replacements, IT core infrastructure replacement, and city's park master plan improvements. And that summarizes all the changes or all the requests that are being asked. The second reading is being requested for November 28th, and we hope to bring the preliminary revenue projections for next fiscal year on December 5th to council, with requesting a budget guidance on December 12th. So that is just a quick next steps, and I'll wrap up here and open up to any questions.
All right, thank you very much. Let's open it up to questions, comments. Anyone on council have anything? Mr. Snyder?
Yeah, so you mentioned in your presentation both the reality of inflation and rising interest rates, with the possibility that they might affect real estate assessments 1 or 2 years out. So what are we doing to prepare for that possibility with this budget proposal?
So we are setting aside $900,000 in general fund revenue surplus funds, which could potentially help us. Technically, these should be used for one-time costs, not knowing how our assessments are going to turn up quite yet, and also having an partial idea of what our cost drivers are. $900,000 is a significant portion of the $2.5 million revenue surplus that we realized at the end of last fiscal year. We're requesting that it be held in the unassigned fund balance for now, and then be brought up at the time of budget, city manager's budget proposal, that if that funding could assist us with that. We have significant cost drivers for fiscal year 2024. The usual compensation increases, the health insurance increases. Along with that, the competitive adjustment for staff compensations. The results are going to be are being discussed internally and are going to be presented soon, within the next couple of weeks. So there could be some impact of that. And funding the rapid response crew, which we are funding with one-time year-end funds for now, but that has to be accounted for in the next year's budget, which is about $260,000. The contracts with other jurisdictions, even other internal contracts, even a 5% increase together could be somewhere between $500,000 to $700,000 impact to us at that overall. And then, again, we still need to see how the grocery tax plays out. That's going to be a $1.9 million hit to us if, as far as the dollars were listed fiscal year. So fiscal year 24 was listed at $1.9 million. So obviously, we're not able to fund everything, but trying to make sure that we're setting some funding aside should our revenues projections not meet all our needs for next year.
So what was the 1.9 million again, please?
The grocery tax, the 1%, if it would be held, the impact to Falls Church would be 1.9 million.
Right, so if that were repealed by the legislature, that would cost us 0.9 million.
Correct.
So, and it's clearly in our legislative program to protect that. So I guess the question is, should we be putting aside more than 900,000 from this, recognizing these potential trends?
It's always good to be erring on the safer side, and yet we could hold more, but we are also setting aside $770,000 to meet the city's unassigned fund balance policy to 17%. So I feel that we are funding our reserves appropriately, and 900,000, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball to say that it will be 900,000 only. It could be more. Just the grocery tax alone is 1.9 million, but it's hard to say how things are going to play out. And we are, in this fiscal year, we have not even done a first quarter report to see how our revenues are shaping up for the current fiscal year. There are a lot of moving pieces to the puzzle, and we're trying to set aside a good amount for city operations so they're not interrupted, or there's no need to reduce anything at the time of 2024 budget.
So the 900,000 is over and above the current fund balance mandates, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Then I know there was some discussion about the parklets, maybe something that ought to be done maybe over time. I don't know whether that'll come up between now and second reading. And the staffing, the 100,000 for training or career, whatever. I'd like to see a little more of that. That's a fair amount of money. And a lot of these are very, very clearly needed, clearly solid, and then there's some of these things that are more sort of discretionary. So hopefully we'll get good public input between now and when this comes back to us. So thank you.
Sure.
All right, thank you. Other comments, Ms. Hardy, Vice Mayor Hardy.
Thank you. Thank you for the Q&A at the back of the staff report and being responsive to all of our questions. I'm going to segue from where Mr. Snyder left off and asking about our reserves. And you probably anticipated this question because I did ask what our total reserve picture looks like. And it looks like we are at 32.5 million total reserves. How does that compare to our policy, given that our debt thresholds are pretty high right now?
So it's as far as the unassigned fund balance goes, we're right at the target of 17%, and at the total available fund balance, we are at close to 30%.
And policy is 30%? Or what's policy?
The policy is 20%. And the idea around building up the reserves in the first few years was so that we can smooth the impact to the residents. So we build it up in the first few years, and then we start using it down in the next few years.
So if there were to be a downturn and we're seeing hits to the property taxes, we have more than just unassigned fund balance to protect us.
That's correct.
The
Yeah.
capital reserve was there to kind of cushion us against kind of bad situations happening at the West Falls project.
That's correct. So essentially, capital reserve is set aside for capital projects, but of course, council has the discretion to move it to unassigned and use it for operations.
Given that we're over 30% and policies at 20, I guess I'm pretty comfortable with that. So moving on to things that did not make the list, and I guess I would advocate that they're pretty high priority in my book. One of the things we talked about last week was around the speed cameras, and I know that's addressed in one of the Q&As. My first question is the $8,000 a month, is that gross cost, and is that net of any revenue we might get from potential speeding tickets that the camera would catch? Question number 9.
Yeah, I'll jump in. That is the gross cost, so it's not netted out. And we are preparing a more comprehensive memo to the City Council that will give the full picture of the costs that would be projected, the revenues that would be projected, where we think they could go, where we think they would not be feasible, and try to wrap that up in one communication to the City Council. Ultimately, the City Council may choose to fund it, even if it is, a net, Photo Red, when it started, was basically a wash financially. Because the violations have dropped off, now it is a net cost to the city, but, the calculation was made that there is a public safety benefit, and that's a worthy investment. So we'll bring that information to the council, hopefully within the next month.
And I guess timing-wise, if the recommendation is that we want to adopt speed cameras, I think we've heard loud and clear that we think that they're effective as a deterrent, and the community certainly sees an increase in speeding, especially along Route 7. How would we fund that if we miss this budget amendment cycle?
I think that would be an FY 2024 question. We'll give council the memo, and the council can say, please proceed, or we want more information, or please don't proceed. And then based on that, if the direction is to proceed, it still will take a number of months to get it stood up. There's a lot of contractual matters that have to be worked out, et cetera. So we believe that this would be an FY 24 item.
Got it. I guess I would like to see it happen sooner than later, and if we can get that memo sooner, I think you're going to hear support to go ahead with it, especially if the vendor, looked at all 5 potential kind of school sites and evaluated that are ready for us and recommends one. I'd hate to have to wait till next budget cycle and then wait for the procurement process and get everything started. So I'd like to see that happen sooner than later, and if we need to show that we will do it through this budget amendment, I would support making that change now. The second thing along the same lines is around bike infrastructure. So I know the strike team that we are supporting with this budget amendment would do both ped and bike. I think we've gotten a few comments around a bike shelter that was originally proposed at City Hall but hasn't been built. Do we have clarity on, I guess, how much that was cost? Is it part of the plans? Is it something that staff recommends we fund as well?
So the CIP team has been looking at this question. I think the current thinking is that within projects already funded, we would be able to find, come to council with a proposal to fund this, the bike shelter at City Hall with funds already appropriated. They need to be kind of moved from one project to another. So we don't, Cindy was part of a CIP discussion today where this was discussed. Cindy, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Thank you, Mr. Shields. Yes, we do believe we have a project that we could move the money over to be able to do the bike shelter cover now, and then look at the project, which would probably be Park Avenue Great Streets because it's all tied to the City Hall and downtown, and then use that funding or a different funding source to then do the future, like Plaza at City Hall at the intersection of Little Falls and Park, because that still needs more development, where we have a plan that we could proceed with for the bike shelter and meet that site plan. So that was actually time today for discussion prior to the comment in, so it came well for consideration today. So it would not need action with this budget amendment.
So I'm not hearing that you need new appropriations for that.
Correct.
Great. My third item is the sidewalk accessibility concern in our commercial areas that we've talked about. Is that something that we can move out of the Broad Street project and get done sooner? So while we've got a willing, I guess, property owner to give us the easement?
I believe we can. We are moving forward to try to get that accomplished. The council has appropriated $1.4 million in total for sidewalks and bus shelters and the like. And so we believe that this is an important missing link effectively, and we could use those dollars to accelerate this project ahead of the rest of the sort of the larger project that's addressing that central part of West Broad Street.
Great. So again, no new appropriations needed. You've got the money. Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct.
Okay. And then the last one is the tree inventory. So I know at least 4 of us, I think, was at the VPIS meeting yesterday, and we heard from kind of the Virginia urban forester and talked about how important having good tree data is to manage our urban forest. And again, I don't know how much is being requested. I think it was in the Q&A perhaps, but if that is a nominal amount, that feels like an important thing for us to do on a 5 to 10 year cycle as recommended.
The funding request as part of the unfunded needs when we did the 2023 budget was $100,000. So it's a significant amount.
That seems like a very expensive tree count.
Yeah, so we can look more into it and
Yeah. I guess could we go back to staff and figure out whether we could do it more affordably?
Sure.
Thank you. That's it for my questions.
Other, Mr. Duncan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So on line, excuse me, 93, number 2, traffic signals replacement and maintenance, $250,000. What my question is the much discussed and notorious Gresham Street signal, which in my view needs to be restored to its proper operation status. Wondering if we have thought about making that part of that $250,000, or if we need to put extra money in to deal with that.
Ms. Messer, do you know the answer to that just from a CIP perspective?
No, I do not. We'd have to follow up.
Okay, could you please do that? Because otherwise I'm going to have to take my shoe off and bang it on the table and just get really cranky, and I don't want to do that. And I might even try to recruit other colleagues to bang their shoes on the table too. Okay, I'm serious, really. Can we please get that taken care of? Communications and outreach, my favorite area. So money for the community survey and the demographer, that's good. We had earlier discussions about using the news press more systematically to get news out about the city. I wonder if that is being handled in this budget amendment, or if that's being considered an expense that we draw from underspending or other monies.
So the advertising that is happening with News Press, that was COVID-related initially in the last couple of years. Those were either ARPA funds were used or operating dollars were used for that. So that has been taken care of. And as we go along for requests that are requiring half-page, full-page advertising, there is funding that is being utilized for that. As of now, no additional funding is needed.
So a sort of episodic as required, but no systematic commitment to once a month or once every other week or anything like that has been discussed at the staff level.
Wyatt, do you know anything about it? Or do you know?
Yeah, that's correct. It is a not a commitment right now for a full half page. But it is something where we are using the news press on a regular basis to get information out to the public on an as-needed basis.
Okay. Well, I would say it's as needed. I mean, last I checked, there's still a pandemic going. And, even advice just to get your seasonal flu shots would be a useful expenditure of resources. I noticed there was a good crowd at the Walgreens today getting shots, so that's encouraging, but, it's going to be a long winter, I'm afraid. The public health message alone would warrant a steadier dose of exposure in the newspaper, in my opinion. Okay, Letty took care of the tree inventory. I think that's important. We heard that yesterday at the VPAS meeting. Speed cameras, BDOs. I think that takes care of it for me. Thank you for the effort to assemble all of this. This is the most thorough supplemental appropriations document that I can recall. And as Ms. Hardy and others have pointed out, since we're in such good shape with our reserves, I think it's responsible to have a systematic and as public a process as possible to spend some of this money that we have that is just sitting around and deploy it for things that the community needs and has asked for. I think is a good thing to do. Thanks.
All right, other comments? Any member of the public wish to speak to this item? Seeing none, the matter is closed to the public. All right, do we have a motion regarding this matter?
Move to grant first reading to TO 22-18, schedule second reading and public hearing for November 28th, 2022, and advertise the same according to law.
Second.
Ms. Hardy on the second. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz-Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
The motion carries. Thank you.
All right, let's move on to the consent agenda items. Does anyone wish to remove any item from the consent agenda? If not, I don't know if we want to, Mr. Shields, you want to read these items briefly, quickly?
Yes, I'll just read them. So, for the public, resolution to amend the trust agreement for the City of Falls Church post-employment benefits other than pension benefits, and resolutions to adopt 3 participating employer plan provisions per amended trust agreement. And then the second one is a resolution to amend the investment guidelines for the city basic and police pension funds. And it's an amendment to section 8.0 and 3.1 of those guidelines.
All right, again, anyone wish to remove any of these items? Mr. Snyder?
Mr. Mayor, I don't. Just one quick comment that as long as it's prudent, it would be interesting for the city to explore investments that are, for example, green bonds and that kind of investment, again, as long as it meets state statutory standards and it's prudent and they're as sound as any other investment. Thank you.
All right. Do we have a motion to approve the?
I move to approve the consent agenda.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
Who's the second?
Second.
Ms. Hiscott, okay. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz-Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
The motion carries. Thank you.
All right, let's move on to business not on the agenda. Any standing regional committees, council liaison reports, council member comments? Ms. Connolly?
I'm just wondering if anyone's planning to go to the Silver Line grand opening tomorrow to represent Falls Church.
Probably. I'm slated to go. I have a conflict, but I'll try to figure it out. All right, any other council member comments?
I'm just confirming, that is on Wednesday? Or
Tomorrow.
on Tuesday?
Tomorrow.
It's on Tuesday.
It was that there were invitations sent out, and it was very specific invitation only, secret kind of things.
Yeah,
Secret
limited
invitations.
invitations tomorrow.
Yes.
Doors open 9:30, event starts at 10:30. The first train ride, 12.
All right, sounds like fun. All right, anything else anybody has before we adjourn? Any last words? All right, let's do it. Let's go ahead and adjourn for the evening. We're adjourned.